Jaime Lannister stood on the balcony overlooking the vast sprawl of King's Landing, the city he had once dismissed as a cesspit of scheming and foul air. With the setting sun gilding the rooftops in coppery orange, he reflected on how much everything had changed since the Mad King's reign, and how much, in truth, had remained the same. The shadows lengthened behind him, casting the outline of his figure against the cold stone walls. Though the city was still loud with the sounds of distant markets closing and drunkards in taverns, this private balcony high in the red keep felt like another world. He was alone here, briefly insulated from the hostility that buzzed in every corridor within these walls. He pressed his hand against the smooth hilt of the sword at his hip, no longer Oathkeeper, but another blade hammered from the remnants of ice, the Stark ancestral sword. Tywin Lannister's ambitions had once given him that blade, forging steel and forging alliances. But Tywin was gone, and so were many illusions of straightforward Lannister superiority. War had ravaged the realm, and though the fighting waned in many regions, the politics had only just begun anew. Jaime sighed. He had become many things: Kingslayer, brother, father in all but name to 3 children, lover to a sister whose cunning threatened to outstrip the realm's greatest vipers. Now he was a man seeking new direction, cornered by pressing realities. From behind him came the whisper of skirts, a soft footfall against the stone floor. So here is the Golden Lion, perched high on the ramparts, surveying his domain, said Margaery Tyrell, stepping into the thickening twilight. Her voice was honey-warm and confident, not a shred of timidity. Her dark curls framed her face, and for a moment, Jaime noticed how the last rays of sunset caught the angles of her cheekbones, illuminating her with the brilliant reds and golds of evening. She had grown into a figure that commanded attention, no longer the docile maiden of courtly tales, but a woman who understood that power in the capital was an intangible thing, beckoning the brave and swallowing the naive. He turned, eyeing her carefully. Months earlier, he would have expected her to speak with nothing but courtesy. But Margaery Tyrell was no longer content with superficial pleasantries. She had been betrothed, widowed, and courted anew in a swirl of political games. The rumors swirled that House Tyrell, her grandmother Olenna especially, sought new ways to extend their influence after too many close calls in King's Landing. I might survey it, but I'm not sure it's mine, Jaime said quietly. These days, I wonder if it truly belongs to anyone at all. Men chase illusions of ownership. It's a game of masks, my lord, Margaery replied, stepping closer to the balcony's edge. In that movement, Jaime caught a swirl of rosewater perfume, reminding him of Highgarden's fabled terraces. But we both know the realm needs stability. There have been too many shifting alliances, too much blood spilled, and it does no good for any of us to remain at each other's throats. Jaime narrowed his eyes, half smiling. Generous words from a Tyrell. How do you propose we find this stability? Her lips curved, but he couldn't decipher all that went on behind her dark eyes. The same way we have done for centuries. Through marriage, alliances, carefully weighted vows. She paused. And sometimes by being practical enough to see that the old way of things must give way to something new. Jaime inhaled deeply, suspecting that she had come tonight with a reason. After all, Margaery was rarely spontaneous when it came to matters of high politics. People said that her grandmother had shaped her into a perfect weapon. Sweet, charming, and lethal when necessary. What use did she have for Jaime? Or perhaps the real question was, what use did House Tyrell have for him? He shifted his golden hand, its gilded fingers reflecting the last glimmers of light. I'm not the man I was. I don't have the ambition of my father, nor do I have the cunning my sister wields like a whip. You'll find I'm a poor tool for Tyrell machinations, Lady Margaery. She tipped her head, a playful flicker in her gaze. Perhaps that's what makes you useful. A man with fewer illusions about his power and station is easier to trust or to guide. Ah, Jaime said, chuckling in a low rasp. So you mean to guide me? Do you take me for a horse to be bridled and reined in? Or a chess piece you can move about the board? Her brows arched ever so slightly. It depends on your willingness to listen, Perhaps we can guide each other." Then her tone softened, quiet as a whisper of wind. "I'm tired, Sir Jaime. Tired of being a pawn in other people's games. You likely know the feeling. We can continue dancing to Cersei's tune, watch her tear down half the realm to keep her hold on the Iron Throne, or—" She left the rest unsaid. Let it hang in the air between them. Jaime thought of his sister, thought of how Cersei's paranoia and thirst for power seemed to deepen with every passing moon. Since she had lost all three of her children, Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, her grief had twisted into something merciless and unstoppable. When Jaime had last spoken to her about forging alliances, she had dismissed him with a scathing remark, calling him soft, no longer worthy of the Lannister name, as though his missing hand and changed heart had rendered him a lesser creature. And so he had drifted, unmoored, uncertain of his place. "All right," he said at length, turning his gaze fully upon Margaery. "You've piqued my interest, my lady. Tell me what you and your house have in mind." She let out a small laugh, the last notes of it trailing into the evening air. "Not here, not now, my lord. Let's find a more private place to talk. Perhaps tomorrow in the gardens. For tonight, let's let the capital keep its secrets and watch the sun slip behind the horizon." And so they stood side by side, Jaime's golden hand resting on the parapet, Margaery's hand just inches from his. Neither reached out to the other, but in that hush, in the shimmering glow of sunset, they had silently set in motion a plan that might reshape the realm, and at the very least, their lives. To say King's Landing was rife with rumor would have been an understatement of epic proportions. The next morning, Jaime woke to quiet murmurings about the presence of House Tyrell in the city. He heard that old Mace Tyrell, pompous and overbearing, had arrived the previous day in secret, accompanied by Olenna in a wheelhouse. No fanfare, no grand entrances, just a hush that fell over certain corners of the Red Keep. One heard whispers of caution, of new alliances, of how the Tyrells might be seeking terms with the crown again. But Jaime knew better. Margaery hadn't come to admire the view from the balcony. She had come to dangle a proposition. The rumor was that Margaery, thrice widowed in spirit if not in every case consummation, was still of an age to marry, and for House Tyrell, securing her future was crucial. He couldn't deny the advantage it provided. By wedding Margaery, a Lannister could theoretically tie the Reach into a more subservient alliance. The question was, would that Lannister be Jaime? He made his way to the royal gardens, or what remained of them after the chaos of recent years. They were still well tended, but the austerity of the capital had seeped even here. Where once there had been fountains overflowing with crystal water, now only trickles remained, the city's resources allocated elsewhere. Birds still sang, though, and bright flowers of red, gold, and violet offered some promise of renewal. Jaime couldn't remember the last time he walked among greenery without the stench of war or the burdens of duty weighing him down. He found Margaery by a carved bench near a modest water lily pond. She wore a gown of pale green, embroidered with small golden roses at the sleeves, reminiscent of her house sigil. She looked up as he approached and smiled. It was neither coy nor ostentatious, just a simple acknowledgement that, for this moment, they were equals in a secret transaction. "My lord," she said, standing in a graceful motion. "You came." He inclined his head in response. "It's rare that I get an invitation that intrigues me. I'd have been a fool not to come." She gestured for him to sit beside her. The perfume of the rose bushes wafted through the air, mixing with the watery scent of the pond. Jaime found himself looking at her profile, the sweep of her lashes, the firmness of her jaw. He had never truly paid attention to her beauty, overshadowed as it was by Cersei's presence in his life, but now he saw Margaery as something else, an undeniable force, more than her outward grace. "All right," Jaime said once he was settled, leaning his golden hand against his knee. "Tell me what this is really about." She took a measured breath, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. The only guards were too far off to catch every word, and she lowered her voice still. "You know my house has always been second to the crown in terms of power and influence. The Tyrells command the breadbasket of Westeros. But since the war, our position has become precarious. We lost many men. The faith of the small folk is splintered, and we must reassert our prominence. Your sister," her eyes hardened slightly, "Queen Cersei has never been our ally in truth. She tolerates us when it suits her. If she could do so without risking famine or rebellion, she'd likely cast us aside entirely. My grandmother has been weighing our options." Jaime nodded. He knew the political dance. House Tyrell had always wanted its roots firmly entwined in the capital's power. Margaery had married King Joffrey or tried to, then King Tommen. Always the Tyrells sought the seat closest to the throne. "And so you want a new path," he said. "One that's not overshadowed by Cersei's wrath." "Yes," Margaery said, folding her hands in her lap. "We propose a marriage between you and me. It would align House Lannister and House Tyrell under a new arrangement. No longer would you or I be subject to the Queen's mercurial nature. There is a chance, in time, to relocate to Highgarden, to claim the seat of the Reach in a union of sorts, cementing a power base that stands strong even if Cersei's rule grows more despotic." Jaime let out a humorless laugh. "And you think she'll stand for it? My dear sister is not known for her lenience regarding betrayal. Taking you as my wife, it would certainly be a statement." "She may oppose it," Margaery allowed, her gaze flicking to the water. "But remember, we still supply the Crown's capital with much of its food and resources. If we threaten to withhold that, if we threaten to disrupt the flow of bread and grain to the city, even Cersei might have to pause. Then there are the lords in the Reach, many of whom resent the Crown's heavy-handed approach. They still remember the destruction wrought by the wars. They don't want another conflict unless it's inevitable. And if it must happen, they'd prefer it be swift, decisive." He reached out with his flesh and blood hand and touched the delicate petals of a rose. The color reminded him of Lannister crimson, though softened by a swirl of pink. "And your grandmother, the Queen of Thorns? Is she behind this? Or is it Mace Tyrell's scheme?" Margaery smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We each have our parts to play. Let's just say Olenna sees the necessity. As does my father, albeit reluctantly. You know how he postures. But beneath that puffed-up chest is a man who only wants House Tyrell to remain whole and unbesmirched. They agree that an alliance with you could be advantageous." He considered her words, pondering the weight of them. If he married Margaery Tyrell, he would align himself with the second most powerful house in the realm. He would be effectively severing ties with Cersei, not just in a romantic sense but in a deeper sense of shared ambition. It was unthinkable a year or two ago, but now it seemed almost logical. He had wearied of Cersei's cruelty, her manipulations, her disregard for the suffering she caused in the name of protecting what was left of House Lannister. Jaime was no saint, but the endless cycle of violence and suspicion was swallowing him. He wanted to break free. Still, he wasn't naive. "You speak of alliance, but let's be frank. The Tyrells want the power of the Reach uncontested, with a figure at their side who can challenge the Lannister name if needed. Does that mean you intend for me to, rule the Reach with you? Dethrone your father as the rightful ruler of Highgarden?" Margaery let out a half-laugh. "My father is no warrior, nor is he an especially canny statesman, for all his boastful words. Grandmother has run our house for decades through him. He knows this, and he knows a transition of power is inevitable. He would step aside gracefully in due time if it meant House Tyrell remains strong and the realm stable. Our suggestion is that if you and I marry, you could claim the dominion of Highgarden through me. Over time, I would, of course, remain your partner, not your puppet. But yes, in a sense, the lordship of the Reach would be ours." She looked at him earnestly then. "We would be lords over the breadbasket of the entire continent. Our hold would be strong enough to protect ourselves from Cersei's wrath. And if it came to civil war, gods forbid, we might even find ourselves in a position to broker peace, or at least fight on our own terms." Jaime said nothing for a few beats, letting the tension settle. In his mind, he envisioned the rolling green hills of the Reach, the golden fields of wheat, the sweet orchards and vineyards. He remembered the stories of Highgarden, how it sat upon gentle slopes overlooking the Mander. He imagined the labyrinthine gardens, the scents of roses and jasmine that would replace the stench of King's Landing. The thought was enticing. Could he truly remake himself there, free of the ugliness and judgments that clung to him here? Finally, he asked in a quiet tone, "And what of Tommen's memory? He was once your husband, if only for a short time." Her eyes faltered for a moment. "I cared for Tommen, truly. He was a sweet boy with a gentle heart, too gentle for the throne. His death was an awful tragedy, but that part of my life is behind me now. I can't linger in grief or the illusions of what might have been. The realm moves on, and so must I." "And Loras," Jaime pressed. The Knight of Flowers was fiercely devoted to the Tyrell name. "He must have a say in this." She glanced off into the distance where the city walls cut the horizon. "Loras is recovering. He was wounded in the war, then subjected to imprisonment by the faith. He's not the knight he once was, but he remains my brother, and he will do as House Tyrell needs. He supports me even if he questions the cost." Jaime let out a long exhale, the tension in his chest loosening just enough for him to notice. There was a certain madness to all of this, yet it also seemed the most rational proposition he'd been offered in months, perhaps in years. "All right," he said at last, "but let's not pretend we're doing this for the good of the realm alone. You and I both stand to gain. There's power in what you suggest, Lady Margaery. I won't feign ignorance. If I align with you, if we marry, I will be turning my back on my sister, on the crown to some extent." A flicker of relief or triumph shone in Margaery's eyes. "Then let us not waste time. We must handle this carefully. If Cersei suspects, we'll be undone before we begin. My grandmother will wish to speak with you as soon as possible." He rose to his feet, offering Margaery his arm. She accepted, placing her hand gently atop the cold gold and steel of his prosthetic. As they strolled through the gardens, two silent silhouettes among the riot of colorful blooms, Jaime felt the weight of fate upon them. This was the first step in a new path, and though it was fraught with danger, it shimmered with the promise of self-determination. Entering Lady Olenna's solar felt like stepping into a nest of hawks disguised by lace and perfumed sachets. The Queen of Thorns was settled in a cushioned chair, wearing an elegant but subdued gown. Her sharp gaze followed Jaime the moment he stepped across the threshold, and she beckoned him forward with an impatient wave of her wrinkled hand. Margaery was already present, standing by a window that overlooked the city. Beside her was Mace Tyrell, barrel-chested, playing at casual confidence. But there was an unmistakable tension in the air, like a wire drawn tight, waiting for someone to pluck it and unleash a resonant note. Jaime felt the prickle of it on his skin. He didn't expect warmth or welcome. He expected interrogation, and Olenna Tyrell never disappointed in that regard. "Sit, sit," Olenna commanded, her voice rasping but layered with undeniable authority. "We have matters to discuss, and I'm far too old to indulge in standing about while posturing." She waited until Jaime lowered himself onto an ornate chair before she continued. "Well, you're certainly one of Tywin's children, though they say you lack his cunning or your sister's cruelty. Possibly an improvement, though time will tell." Jaime inclined his head. "I can't imagine it's a compliment to be anything like my sister these days." That comment drew a thin smile from Olenna. "Ah, so you do have a tongue in your head. Good. I'd hate to think my granddaughter was marrying a dullard." She turned her piercing gaze to Margaery. "Have you explained to him the realities? That a union with you means stepping into a viper's pit?" Margaery nodded. "We discussed some of it. Now we can speak more openly, as we're all here." Mace cleared his throat, as though reminding them of his presence. "Yes, well, I think it's clear that we must be united if we're to negotiate from a place of strength. House Tyrell remains the most powerful house in the Reach, and you, Ser Jaime, would bring." "He knows what he'd bring, you oaf," Olenna snapped, shutting her son down. She turned back to Jaime. "Can you control your sister? That is the question. If we proceed with this marriage, Cersei will have a fit the size of the neck. She might try to starve us out or turn the faith or the remnants of the crown's forces against the Reach. We need to know if you can keep her from unleashing her madness upon us all." Jaime met her stare, unflinching. "No one can control Cersei entirely, but I know her better than anyone alive. If we move swiftly and ensure we have enough lords backing us, if we make it clear that defying us means defying the breadbasket of Westeros, Cersei will face a choice. She can't raise an army out of thin air, and the city's coffers aren't overflowing as they once were. She needs coin and resources. She needs the Reach. That gives us leverage." Olenna's expression softened slightly, her keen mind measuring his words. "Leverage, yes. It's a dangerous game, but it's all we have, I suppose." She allowed a pause, then flicked her gaze to Margaery. "And you, my sweet girl, you're ready to do this?" Margaery didn't hesitate. "I am, for House Tyrell and for myself. We've been dancing to the crown's tune for long enough." Olenna nodded. "So be it. We will need to plan the wedding discreetly. Perhaps not in King's Landing. That might be too obvious. We can say we're hosting a grand feast at Highgarden to celebrate, Margaery's name day or some other social pretext. Invitations will be sent to those we trust, or those too cowardly to defy us. Then we proceed with the ceremony. By the Jaime word reaches Cersei, the vows will be sealed." Jaime considered this plan. "And after the wedding, what then? Surely Cersei will not stand idle." "She will rage," Olenna said, nodding. "But your presence as a Lannister might temper it. You'll be her only surviving sibling, after all, if Tyrion never returns. The gold mines in the Westerlands are no longer as fruitful. The crown needs the Reach. If she openly attacks us, she risks a revolt from the other lords, especially if the marriage is done and recognized by the faith. She can't excommunicate every single ally we have without the realm collapsing." Mace rubbed his hands together, as though warming them at a fire. "Then, once the marriage is recognized, we can start consolidating the loyalty of the lesser lords in the Reach. They follow House Tyrell, of course, but they might have qualms about a Lannister taking charge. We'll need to show them Jaime is worthy. Perhaps a tour of the region, a demonstration of chivalry and good governance, that sort of thing." "Boring nonsense," Olenna huffed, "but likely necessary." Jaime almost smiled at the dynamic between the old matriarch and her son. One so sharp, the other so eager to appear in control. "I can do my part to win them over," he said. "I may not be the Kingsguard I once was, but I still know how to address lords and knights in a language they'll understand. Honor, stability, prestige." Margaery's gaze flicked to him. "We'll handle it together. Our union will signal a shift. Let's ensure it's for the better, not just another war in the making." Olenna rapped her knuckles on the arm of her chair, a final punctuation. "Very well, then. Preparations must begin at once. Mace, see to the logistics of moving our people to Highgarden discreetly. We'll need a celebratory pretext that won't raise too much suspicion in the capital. Margaery, you'll need to continue your appearances at court as if nothing is happening. Smile, flirt if need be, keep the rumor mill confused. Ser Jaime, you must do the same. Act as though you're still loyal to the Queen, as though you have no ambitions beyond guarding her precious seat. In a few weeks, we'll depart separately and converge in the Reach." They all rose, signaling the end of the clandestine meeting. Jaime felt a swirl of conflicting emotions in his chest. Anticipation, dread, resolve. He recalled the vow he had once made to Cersei, that they would come into this world together and leave it together. Now he was plotting to separate himself from her forever. Perhaps it was inevitable, a final fracturing. Even so, he couldn't deny a flicker of excitement at the thought of forging a different path in Highgarden, away from the city's filth and from Cersei's consuming darkness. As he left Lady Olenna's solar with Margaery at his side, he wondered if the step he was taking would damn him further or finally redeem him. Yet either way, he was determined to see it through. Sometimes you had to seize the future you wanted, or remain chained to the past that was killing you. In the weeks that followed, King's Landing was abuzz with gossip, but none of it touched directly upon Jaime's plan. Instead, Rumors circled about raids on the Riverlands, about the Iron Fleet's movements, about Cersei's negotiations with foreign envoys. Margaery continued to make appearances at courtly feasts, charming visiting dignitaries and exchanging pleasantries with the city's ladies. Jaime maintained his post as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard in all but name, though with Tommen gone, the position was more symbolic than real. He kept up the facade of loyalty, standing behind Cersei's throne during meetings in the Great Hall. She rarely spoke to him directly now, except to issue commands or pointed remarks about his wandering mind. Her bitterness was a tangible fog around her. Sometimes, Jaime caught her staring at him with a mixture of suspicion and longing, as though she could sense his growing detachment but hadn't yet uncovered the cause. When they were alone, her words cut like knives, accusing him of disloyalty, of weakness. He said little in return. Let her rant. That, he supposed, was the most prudent course until he could leave the city. An invitation arrived to celebrate Margaery's name day at Highgarden. Many lords and ladies of the Reach were invited, as well as a select few from the Crownlands. The event was framed as a leisurely affair, a chance to restore a semblance of normalcy to the realm, with feasting and merriment in the famed gardens. Jaime, of course, had to feign disinterest in front of Cersei. "What do you want with Margaery Tyrell's name day?" she asked one evening in her chambers, a sneer twisting her lips. "She's a pretty rose, I suppose, but she's nothing but a nuisance." Jaime shrugged, adjusting the strap of his tunic. "I've had enough of King's Landing's stale air. A short trip to Highgarden might remind me that Westeros has beauty left in it." Cersei laughed scornfully. "Beauty is a lie. I wonder what that Viper Olenna is planning. Perhaps you should go see if they're conspiring. Spy on them for me." Jaime forced a small, grim smile. "As you command." It was all too easy to slip away under the guise of doing Cersei's bidding. In the back of his mind, he recalled Margaery's instructions. They would all travel separately, so as not to arouse suspicion of a coordinated movement. And so he set forth, riding out of the capital a day before Margaery's official departure. He took a small retinue of Lannister guards, men he trusted only to the extent that they followed gold and power. By the time he reached the Rose Road, the bustle of King's Landing was behind him, replaced by rolling hills that slowly transformed into the lush farmland of the Reach. The air grew sweeter, the sky seemed bluer, and Jaime felt as if each mile carried him away from the poison that was his old life and closer to something new. He arrived at Highgarden under the midday sun, the castle's famed ramparts covered in vines and flowers. The seat of House Tyrell was more than just a fortress. It was an Eden of carefully sculpted terraces, archways woven with ivy, courtyards bursting with roses of every hue imaginable. Jaime had never spent more than a brief time here, and now he was struck by its splendor. It was as if he had wandered into a living tapestry, a realm of vibrant colors and heady perfumes. The Mander glistened far below the castle, winding its way through fertile lands. Servants and guards escorted him through courtyards where fountains trickled under the shade of pomegranate trees. He was shown to a lavish guest suite that overlooked the orchard. The warmth of sunlight filled the room, casting a golden glow on the polished floors. Outside, the gentle breeze carried the scent of flowering vines in through the open window. Jaime almost felt uneasy with how pleasant it was. He was used to corridors echoing with suspicion and malice. "Lord Tyrell wishes to see you at your earliest convenience," a steward told him, bowing low. "I'll see him soon," Jaime replied, and once he was alone, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. This was the place where his life would change irrevocably, for better or worse. He freshened up, removing the dust of travel. When he emerged into the corridor, he saw Margaery waiting for him, wearing a gown of pale rose that seemed to blend with the blossoms in the air. She gave him a quiet nod. "Come," she said in a soft voice. "Let's walk in the gardens. My father is busy greeting other guests, but grandmother will join us soon." They made their way to a secluded corner of Highgarden's famed labyrinth, a hedge maze lined with sweet-smelling flowers. It was delightfully cool and shaded by tall, well-manicured hedges. Once they were deep enough to be shielded from prying eyes, Margaery placed a hand on Jaime's arm. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "The wedding is planned for 2 days from now, at dusk, in the Godswood courtyard. It will be a small ceremony at first, just enough witnesses to make it legitimate. Then we'll have the public feast, which will mask the truth of what transpired." Jaime nodded. "And Cersei?" Margaery's expression was resolute. "We will send her the tidings once it's done. She can't undo a sealed marriage recognized by the faith without inciting open conflict. We'll have enough lords present to bear witness, among them Tarly, Rowan, and Redwine. They'll be cautious, but once it's done, they'll likely fall in line for fear of losing Highgarden's favor. Our control of the grain and harvest is too vital." He looked into her eyes, searching for some hint of fear or doubt. "Are you certain about this, Margaery?" Her dark eyes flashed with determination. "I am. If we do nothing, Cersei will eventually turn on us. I'd rather strike first, in a manner of speaking, and protect the Reach from her tyranny. This marriage, it's not just a power play. It's a chance to prevent more bloodshed, if we handle it correctly." He allowed himself a small breath of relief. "Then let's see it through." They heard footsteps on the gravel path behind them. Olenna emerged from around the corner, leaning on her cane, expression set. She studied them both, lips pressed tight. "Well, you two look ready enough," she said, and then shifted her attention to Jaime. "You know, you could still turn tail and run back to your sister's side, feeding her all our secrets. That would be the cunning Lannister thing to do." Jaime met her hard stare. "I've made my choice. Your plan is as good for me as it is for House Tyrell." Olenna inclined her head. "Yes, well, I'd hoped you'd say that, because if you were to betray us now, I'd be forced to have the guards toss you headfirst from the ramparts. And that would be most inconvenient for my granddaughter's nuptials." Her tone was almost playful, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "Now, do keep in mind that we must present a convincing charade to the guests until the moment of the ceremony. Appear as though you're merely a visitor, here for the feast. The last thing we need is some fool carrying word back to King's Landing prematurely." "I understand," Jaime said, a trace of a smile tugging at his lips. In the capital, all the intrigue had been suffocating. Here, the intrigue was strangely refreshing, perhaps because it was laced with the possibility of a new future. "Good," Olenna replied. "I'll leave you to your walk, then. Margaery, do keep him out of trouble." With that, she hobbled off, leaving Jaime and Margaery alone again amidst the rustling hedges. Margaery exhaled, a gentle smile curving her lips as she looked at Jaime. 2 days, and everything changes. He reached out and took her hand, not out of passion, but out of a sense of solidarity, a mutual commitment to the path they'd chosen. 2 days, he echoed, and there's no turning back. On the evening of the wedding, the sun dipped low over Highgarden's turrets, bathing the castle in warm orange hues. Servants rushed through the corridors, attending to final details for the main feast. Musicians tuning their instruments, scullions hauling in roasts and pies from the kitchens, maids scattering rose petals in the great hall. The official line was that tonight's revels were in honor of Margaery's name day, a joyous affair to remind the Reach of the bounty that still flourished. But in the quiet Godswood courtyard, hidden behind a tall hedgerow, only a select few gathered. The courtyard was small, surrounded by towering heart trees and graceful willows, a secluded sanctuary where the old gods and the new might both be acknowledged. The only sound was the gentle trickling of a small spring that flowed into a shallow pool. Tall torches cast flickering light across the carved stone path. Margaery stood before the small altar, wearing a gown of cream silk, embroidered with delicate golden roses at the bodice. Her hair was coiled in an intricate style, interwoven with tiny rosebuds. Jaime noticed the tension in her posture, though her face remained composed. He felt a sudden surge of empathy for her. She had survived so many precarious marriages, first to Renly Baratheon, then to Joffrey, then Tommen, none of which ended well. Now here she was, about to pledge herself again, in a marriage meant to secure a kingdom. Jaime approached, dressed not in armor but in finery of Lannister red and gold. He had insisted on wearing a formal tunic that bore the lion crest on his left breast. If House Tyrell wanted the might of House Lannister, they would have it on display. As he took his place beside Margaery, he glanced around. Olenna stood near the altar, along with Mace Tyrell looking both proud and anxious. A handful of Tyrell retainers, including a Septon, were present. Loras was absent. Still recovering, Margaery had said, though whether that was an excuse or truth, Jaime couldn't say. Perhaps Loras simply couldn't bear to witness another of Margaery's marriages. The Septon wore a simple robe and held a copy of the seven-pointed star. Clearing his throat, he began. We gather here beneath the eyes of gods old and new to join Ser Jaime Lannister and Lady Margaery Tyrell in holy matrimony. They come together pledging unity not just between themselves, but between their houses and the realm at large. Let their vows be spoken, their hands joined, and the blessings of the seven be upon them. Jaime could almost feel his heart thudding. His left hand was calloused from sword work. His right hand was absent, replaced by cold gold. Steeling himself, he repeated the words the Septon prompted. I, Jaime Lannister, do take thee, Margaery Tyrell, to be my wedded wife. I pledge you my troth, my protection, and my name, that together we shall stand in this world, forging a bond that no man can sunder. He heard Margaery's voice, soft yet firm, echoing the vow. I, Margaery Tyrell, do take thee, Jaime Lannister, to be my wedded husband. I pledge you my faith, my counsel, and the strength of House Tyrell, that we shall unite our houses as one, and together strive for prosperity and peace. The Septon tied a ribbon of gold and green around their joined hands, symbolizing the union of House Lannister and House Tyrell. Jaime's golden hand felt the cool pressure of her fingers. They exchanged rings, simple bands that had been hastily forged for the occasion. Hers set with a small golden lion, his engraved with a rose. And so, by the authority granted to me by the faith of the seven, I declare you husband and wife. One flesh, one heart, one soul, now and forever. The Septon finished. Olenna Tyrell let out a silent breath of relief. Mace beamed. 2 Tyrell knights pounded their fists against their breastplates in solemn salute. And just like that, it was done. Jaime felt an odd mix of emotions swirling within him. An undeniable sense of release, a pang of guilt, a sharp prickle of fear, and a surprising glimmer of hope. He leaned forward to kiss Margaery lightly on the lips, sealing the union in the eyes of the watchers. She met him halfway, her lips soft. When they drew apart, Margaery smiled, a quiet steel beneath her sweetness. We've done it, she whispered. We have, Jaime murmured back, touching her cheek gently. Olenna hobbled forward. Well, that was lovely. Now the real work begins. I expect you both at the main hall within the half-hour for the feast. Wear your best smiles. Try not to look as though you're plotting the downfall of half the realm. She gave Jaime a pointed stare. Congratulations, you're one of us now. Try not to make me regret it. Jaime inclined his head politely. He was about to reply when Margaery gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. Let's go, husband, she said, an edge of amusement in her tone. We have guests to entertain. Together, they made their way toward the great hall, where music and laughter already spilled into the corridors. Servants flitted about, placing floral arrangements and ensuring the tables were perfectly set. When the herald announced their arrival, a modest cheer rose from the assembled lords and ladies. Jaime knew that most here believed they were simply celebrating Margaery's name day. And yet, from this moment on, everything had shifted. They took their seats at the high table side by side. Margaery exchanged pleasantries with the assembled notables. Lords Tarly, Redwine, and Rowan were there, each with retinues, each politely praising Lady Margaery's hospitality. Jaime recognized a few sidelong glances as the lords tried to parse why Ser Jaime Lannister was accorded such a place of honor at a Tyrell feast. He knew rumors would fly as soon as the night ended, perhaps even sooner. But by then, the marriage would be gossip, not speculation. And it would be unstoppable. Wine flowed freely, minstrels sang ballads. The smell of roast duck, honey-glazed ham, and sweet pastries teased Jaime's senses. He drank sparingly, not wanting to dull his wits. His gaze swept the hall, noting each face, each reaction. Some were smiling, some were curious. Margaery's father, Mace, seemed in his element, regaling lesser lords with grandiose tales of House Tyrell's victories, while Olenna remained seated, quietly observing. In a quieter moment, Jaime leaned toward Margaery. "Are you at ease, my lady? Or should I say my wife?" She let out a small laugh, though it was tinged with tension. "It feels strange to hear that. We've known each other, but not intimately. This union is so calculated. Yet it's our best chance." Jaime nodded, meeting her gaze. "You deserve honesty from me. I can't promise I'll be a perfect husband, nor can I promise that everything we do will go smoothly. But I do promise not to betray you. I'm in this to see the realm better than it is under my sister's shadow." Margaery's eyes flickered with gratitude. "That is more than enough," she said simply, lifting her cup to his in a silent toast. The feast lasted late into the night, but eventually, guests drifted away to their chambers or to the city below. The minstrels laid down their lutes, servants cleared platters of half-eaten pies. Jaime felt the weight of the day pressing on him like armor. He and Margaery retreated to the suite prepared for them as newlyweds. No grand announcements, no rowdy bedding ceremony. This was a private affair, too dangerous to flaunt. Inside the chamber, the bed was strewn with fresh rose petals, and a single candle flickered on the dresser. Margaery stood by the window, unpinning the net of jewels from her hair. Jaime removed his tunic, setting it aside carefully. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, just new. Neither seemed eager to rush anything. After a while, Margaery turned to face him. "We can face this marriage as partners. Our arrangement needn't be a loveless pact," she said quietly, stepping closer. Her eyes were soft with a mix of vulnerability and resolution. "But also, I don't expect immediate affection or passion just because we share vows. I want to give this time. We've both been shaped by difficult circumstances." Jaime appreciated her candor. The many times he had shared a bed had been overshadowed by 1,000 complications, none more than the taboo with Cersei. Now, for the first time, he could potentially be with a woman as a rightful husband. But the ghosts of his old life loomed around him. "You deserve a husband who can be gentle," he said, his voice low. "Someone who can honor you in truth, not merely in name." Margaery reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Let's just take this step by step," she whispered. "We have the rest of our lives to figure out how we fit together as man and wife." He nodded, relieved. They shared a tentative kiss, then prepared themselves for bed. The night was quiet, save for the distant chirp of night insects from the gardens below. Jaime's thoughts wandered before sleep claimed him. He thought of the uncertain future that lay ahead, how soon the news would reach Cersei, how she would react, how the realm would respond. He thought of the line he had crossed by marrying Margaery, the irrevocable break from the bonds that had defined him. For so long, he had been the Kingslayer, sworn to protect the royal family even as he violated his oaths. Now he was the consort of the Lady of Highgarden, poised to become a lord in his own right. Despite the swirl of uncertainty, something felt right about this path. As he closed his eyes, Jaime allowed a single, uncharacteristic note of optimism to settle in his chest. For the first time in a very long while, he believed there might be a life for him outside the suffocating embrace of his sister and the endless ghosts of King's Landing. The dawn after the wedding was a crescendo of revelations. Rumors spread first among the servants, then spilled into the courtyard. "Lady Margaery is wed. To whom? Why, Ser Jaime Lannister. Can you believe it?" Each retelling grew more dramatic, especially as none had witnessed the actual ceremony. But soon enough, Mace Tyrell announced it officially, proclaiming that, in a quiet midnight ceremony, his beloved daughter had taken Jaime Lannister as her husband, an alliance to further peace between their houses, to cement the stability of the Reach in uncertain times. For many in Highgarden's orbit, The news sparked a flurry of reactions. Some welcomed Jaime, pointing out that the Lannister name still commanded respect, that perhaps this alliance would prevent further bloodshed. Others fretted that Cersei would be incensed and might retaliate. But the immediate effect was a rush to pledge fealty or at least recognition of the union. After all, House Tyrell was still the paramount house of the Reach, and if they had chosen Jaime Lannister to strengthen their line, who would gainsay them? Privately, in a small council chamber within Highgarden, the newly formed alliance convened. Olenna, Mace, Jaime, and Margaery were joined by a handful of trusted advisors. Maps of the Reach sprawled across a large oaken table, detailing major roads, farmlands, and strongholds. Margaery stood at Jaime's side, her presence steadying him as he laid out potential points of strategy. Olenna glowered at the map, tapping a wrinkled finger on King's Landing's location. News of this marriage will reach the capital soon, if it hasn't already. We can be sure the Queen will dispatch her messengers, and possibly her soldiers, to gauge our defenses. Mace folded his arms over his chest. She won't dare move an army this quickly, not while the city's coffers are drained. But we can't rely on that to keep us safe forever. Jaime leaned over the table. We have a window of time. When Cersei learns I've married Margaery, she'll be furious. But she'll also weigh her options. She needs the Reach for food. A direct attack would risk plunging the city into famine, especially if we burn the fields before her soldiers can seize them. She may attempt to sow discord among the lesser lords of the Reach, turning them against House Tyrell. Margaery nodded, tracing a line across the map that represented the Mander. We should move quickly to secure the loyalty of these houses. Her fingertip touched the sigils of House Tarly, House Redwine, House Rowan, House Oakhart, House Florent. We invite them to Highgarden for a great council, explain the new alliance, and reassure them that their interests will be better served under our leadership rather than under the iron fist of Cersei. Olenna snorted. Reassure them, yes, with pointed reminders that the Tyrell coffers and harvests can either be quite generous or unyielding. Jaime straightened. We should also send an envoy to the Stormlands. They've been battered, but if we can secure even a neutral stance from House Baratheon's remnants or from the Lord sworn to Storm's End, Cersei's position weakens. Mace looked thoughtful, stroking his mustache. Yes, and I'll arrange a meeting with the Redwines, who control the Arbor's fleet. If Cersei tries anything by sea, the Redwine fleet can bottle her up. Olenna clapped her hands together, ending the discussion. Good. Then let's move swiftly. Each of us has tasks to carry out. Mace, see that the letters are penned by evening. Jaime, you'll accompany Margaery when we welcome the lords here. We'll need your presence to underscore the Lannister-Tyrell partnership. As the meeting concluded, Jaime watched the Tyrells disperse with purposeful strides. This was the difference between Highgarden and the Red Keep. There was an efficiency here, a willingness to act, instead of endless plotting behind closed doors. He felt a strange sense of camaraderie forming, though not so much that he forgot the risk they all carried. He lingered in the chamber for a moment, scanning the map. Margaery stepped beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Are you all right? He nodded. I'm adapting. Part of me still expects Cersei to appear, screaming accusations, or to wake up and realize this was all a dream. She watched him with earnest concern. You've spent your whole life in that tangle with your sister. No one expects you to simply shrug it off. But you're here now. Let that be your anchor. Her words soothed him. Thank you. And you, are you prepared for the storm that might follow? Margaery's eyes hardened in determination. I've survived 3 marriages, witnessed too much bloodshed in the capital, and endured imprisonment by the faith. I'm not afraid. I will defend Highgarden, my family, and this marriage. Cersei Lannister will not break me. Jaime believed her. In that moment, he saw not just the charming court lady, but a woman forged by trials, resolute and unyielding. He placed his flesh and blood hand over hers, nodding. Then we face it together. 3 days later, the lords of the Reach began arriving in earnest. Their banners fluttered along the Rose Road, streaming into Highgarden with retinues of knights and servants. At first, they came under the impression of a grand council to address the region's post-war rebuilding. But word spread quickly that Margaery Tyrell had wed Jaime Lannister in a clandestine ceremony. Curiosity, concern, and a hint of trepidation colored the atmosphere as each lord took his seat in Highgarden's great hall. House Tarly arrived first, with Randyll Tarly at the helm. A stern, disciplined man, known for his martial prowess, Randyll Tarly was not one for flattery or wasted words. He greeted Margaery respectfully but eyed Jaime with caution. "I'd not have expected you to forsake the crown in this manner, Sir Jaime," he said as they spoke in a corner of the hall. "Marrying Lady Margaery, you must know Queen Cersei will be enraged." Jaime dipped his head. "She may be, but I've chosen the path that best secures peace in the Reach. There's no sense in living under the constant threat of the crown's whims." Randyll's gaze swept the hall, where banners of golden roses intermingled with the occasional lion crest. "Tyrell rule is strong here, but do not underestimate the Queen's vengeance." "Nor do I underestimate your capabilities, Lord Tarly," Jaime said, lowering his voice. "You have the discipline and strategic mind the Reach needs if conflict arises. We ask only that you see the value in standing with us rather than bending to a queen in King's Landing who might discard you when convenient." Randyll's expression was stern as ever, but Jaime sensed a grudging respect. "I serve the Reach. If Lady Margaery and House Tyrell stand firm, and if your alliance holds, I'll consider my obligations. But if I sense any betrayal, I won't hesitate to act." Jaime nodded, satisfied for the moment. "Understood." Next came House Rowan of Golden Grove, lorded by Mathis Rowan, a more diplomatic figure. He spoke eagerly of trade improvements along the Mander and of forging treaties with lesser lords to prevent banditry. Jaime listened and reassured him that the new alliance between Lannister and Tyrell intended to foster stability. Rowan seemed pleased enough with the prospect of renewed order. The Redwines, represented by Paxter Redwine, arrived the following morning, their sigils of the Burgundy grape clusters and vines fluttering in the breeze. Paxter was a practical man, more interested in how the alliance might affect trade routes and the safety of shipping lanes. Margaery handled him expertly, outlining how the Tyrell-Lannister union intended to back the Redwine fleet's status, ensuring no hostility from the crown might disrupt the Arbor's wealth of wine export. As Jaime watched Margaery navigate the swirl of lords, he realized she had a natural gift for diplomacy that rivaled even the wiliest courtiers in King's Landing. She knew when to flatter, when to reassure, and when to subtly threaten. Olenna hovered in the background, offering the occasional cutting remark that seemed to solidify the Tyrell position. Mace boomed with compliments and proud declarations, but it was Margaery's voice that truly swayed the lords, and Jaime found himself proud to stand beside her, to lend his name and sword to her cause. In the evenings, banquets were held in Highgarden's feasting halls. Wine poured freely, minstrels serenaded the highborn guests, and the scent of roast boar and spiced vegetables permeated the air. Jaime and Margaery would sit at the high table, their marriage an unspoken statement of defiance against King's Landing. Each night, Jaime scanned the crowd for signs of discontent or covert betrayal. He saw only courtesy, though sometimes tinged with the guardedness that accompanied uncertain times. After several days of feasting and private council sessions, the major lords of the Reach seemed tentatively on board. They recognized that House Tyrell was still their liege, and the addition of Jaime Lannister signaled a new power dynamic that might protect the region from the crown's predations. It was not an ironclad alliance of hearts, but rather a pragmatic acceptance of the situation. In Westeros, that was often the best one could hope for. Eventually, the time came for many of the visiting lords to depart, returning to their own lands with promises to mobilize levies if needed. Jaime and Margaery escorted them to the gates, exchanging parting courtesies. As the caravans rolled out, Jaime experienced a strange sense of accomplishment. For all the moral compromises in his life, he had never truly engaged in forging alliances for the greater good. This time, though, it felt as if he and Margaery had managed something worthwhile, uniting the Reach in a stance that might deter more senseless violence. When the last of the banners disappeared from the horizon, Jaime and Margaery stood atop Highgarden's outer walls, the sun setting behind them in a blaze of orange and purple. The air was sweet with the fragrance of the surrounding fields. He glanced at her, taking in the delicate lines of her face and the quiet determination in her eyes. "It seems we have, at least for the moment, secured the Reach's backing," he said softly. She let out a sigh that was half relief, half lingering worry. "Yes, but this is only the first step. The real test will come when news of our marriage hits King's Landing. You know Cersei better than anyone. Will she attack, or will she negotiate?" Jaime's jaw tightened. He gazed out at the rolling expanse of farmland. "She'll likely bide her time, see if there's any weakness. She may attempt to bribe or intimidate certain houses behind our backs. If that fails, she'll try to break us in open conflict. Either way, we should be prepared." Margaery set her hand on his arm. "We will be. The Tyrells have wealth and supplies. The Lords of the Reach have pledged their swords, and you carry the name Lannister. It may be enough to give her pause. And if she does come for us, we'll stand firm." He covered her hand with his own, a brief warmth shared between them. Together, yes. In that moment, a sense of unity bound them. They might not share a deep romantic love yet, but they shared conviction, a determination to protect what they had built. Over the coming weeks, they worked tirelessly to strengthen Highgarden's fortifications, improve trade routes, and quietly secure alliances further afield. Each day, ravens brought new tidings from across Westeros. Jaime scanned them, always anticipating a letter from King's Landing. Each day it didn't come. The tension coiled tighter in his gut, until finally, one morning, it arrived. A raven bearing the seal of the crown, addressed to Jaime Lannister and Margaery Tyrell at Highgarden. Jaime stood in the solar, with Margaery and Olenna perched nearby. He broke the wax seal with deliberate care. The letter was short, written in a bold, slashing hand. "Jaime Lannister, you dare wed the Tyrell girl without my knowledge? You have broken faith not just with me, but with our house. Return to King's Landing at once to explain yourself. If you do not, you will confirm your treachery and provoke my full wrath. Cersei Lannister, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms." Jaime read it twice, feeling the weight of those words. The final line, in particular, conjured an image of Cersei's blazing eyes, her fists clenched. He passed the letter to Margaery, who scanned it, her face tightening. Olenna gave a huff, lips pursed in disdain. "So there we have it," Olenna said. "A short-tempered summons. You can be sure she's already thinking of ways to punish us." Jaime's expression was grim. "If I go to King's Landing, I'll likely be seized or forced into some humiliating submission. If I don't go, she'll brand me an open traitor. Either way, we must prepare." Margaery set the letter aside. "We expected this. If she wants you to return, it means she's not yet strong enough to bring an army here. She's trying to intimidate you, to lure you back to her den." Olenna nodded in agreement. "And we mustn't give in to intimidation. Let her stew. You, Jaime, are the golden son she cannot afford to kill outright, at least not yet. Use that to your advantage." Jaime took a moment to consider his response. "I'll write back a carefully worded refusal. I'll say that my duties here in the Reach require my attention, and that House Tyrell and I remain loyal to the realm's stability. If she desires to send an envoy, we will receive them. That will buy us time." Margaery smiled, a wry curve of her lips. "Exactly. Present it as a diplomatic courtesy, not open defiance. Meanwhile, we shore up our defenses, gather more allies if possible." Olenna clapped her hands. "That's settled, then. Let the queen rage. We'll see which side the wind blows when the harvest draws near and she grows hungry for our grains." Jaime breathed out. For the second time, he felt a hint of relief that the confrontation was not immediate. But he knew that every day they remained at odds with the crown was a day closer to open conflict. The letter in his hand felt heavier than parchment had any right to feel. This was the threshold. From here on, there was no turning back. Weeks passed. The harvest in the Reach was bountiful, wagons of grain filling storehouses in Highgarden and beyond. The lords who had pledged to the Tyrell Lannister alliance made good on their promises, at least so far. Soldiers drilled in the courtyards, and watchtowers were manned with keen-eyed scouts. Jaime oversaw much of the martial preparedness, using his experience from years of warfare to ensure the men were well-trained and disciplined. Randyll Tarly proved invaluable, leading exercises and forging the disparate levies into a cohesive force. Margaery proved tireless in governance, handling disputes among local farmers, ensuring fair distribution of resources, and maintaining a steady flow of coin for the troops. The small folk admired her, especially as she regularly rode out to the villages to hear their petitions, distributing alms and supplies where needed. This gesture of care went a long way in securing the populace's loyalty. Watching her in action, Jaime marveled at how different she was from Cersei in dealing with the common folk. Where Cersei often wielded fear or indifference, Margaery won hearts with compassion. Jaime found himself respecting her more each day, and some nights, when they lay together, a tentative warmth bloomed between them that went beyond a mere political arrangement. Occasionally, they'd walk in Highgarden's courtyards at dusk, speaking in low voices about strategy or about their pasts. Margaery would share stories of her childhood in the gentle climate of the Reach, of how she'd always dreamed of making Highgarden an even more magnificent place of art, music, and scholarship. Jaime would reminisce, haltingly, about his youth in Casterly Rock, how he'd once idolized knighthood before the weight of reality tarnished it. These moments of intimacy, though small, forged a bond that transcended the alliance. But no bond could entirely calm the undercurrent of impending conflict. Every day that passed without a direct move from King's Landing meant tension built, like a rope stretched taut. Ravens came bearing various news: skirmishes near the Riverlands, changes in the Stepstones, political upheavals in Dorne. Yet nothing from Cersei, no envoy, no further summons. The silence was more unnerving than open aggression. Until one morning, a watchman on the southwestern tower spotted a small column of riders approaching from the direction of King's Landing. The banners were Lannister crimson, accompanied by the royal sigil of the crowned lion. Jaime and Margaery hurried to the ramparts, peering down. There were perhaps 20 riders, led by a figure in gleaming armor. Jaime recognized the banner at once. Lannister men, likely commanded by someone Cersei trusted. They entered Highgarden's courtyard under a white flag of parley. Jaime descended the steps, Margaery at his side, flanked by a handful of Tyrell guards. Olenna stood near the back, quietly watching. The lead rider removed his helm, revealing a face Jaime knew well, Ser Lancel Lannister. Though he looked older, his expression hardened by fervor. Once, Lancel had been Cersei's puppet and a plaything of the faith. Now he appeared to serve as her envoy. His eyes flicked over Jaime and Margaery with equal parts curiosity and disapproval. "Ser Jaime," Lancel said in a stiff tone, "I come bearing Queen Cersei's words." Jaime inclined his head, keeping his voice neutral. "Then speak them." Lancel cleared his throat, unrolling a small parchment. "Her Grace offers you a final chance to prove your loyalty. Renounce this marriage to Margaery Tyrell, return to King's Landing, and resume your place at her side. Should you do so, your sins will be forgiven, and the Tyrell household may be spared her wrath. However, if you persist in this folly, King's Landing will have no choice but to consider your union treason. Forces are mustering to bring you to heel, and the blood that spills will be on your head." A hush fell over the courtyard. Jaime's jaw clenched, a cold anger flickering in his chest. He stepped forward. "Tell Cersei I stand by my marriage to Margaery Tyrell. I will not renounce my wife or my alliance with House Tyrell. If she truly wishes to preserve peace, she may send envoys to negotiate. If she means to bring war, then let her come." Lancel's expression darkened, and his voice dropped. "You would choose a Tyrell OV, or your own blood?" Jaime felt Margaery's presence beside him, strong and unwavering. He pressed his lips into a thin line. "I choose what's right for the realm and for me. Blood can be thicker than water, but it can also drown you if it's poisoned. A flicker of something, perhaps pity, perhaps contempt, flashed in Lancel's gaze. Very well, I will bear your answer to the queen. Prepare yourself, cousin. The city will not rest until your betrayal is answered. With that, Lancel wheeled his horse around, signaling his riders to depart. Jaime stood silent as he watched them ride out of Highgarden's gates and vanish down the Rose Road. Margaery slipped her hand into his. "You've made your choice irrevocably clear now," she whispered. "Yes," Jaime said quietly, "and so has she. There will be no more peace between us." Olenna clicked her tongue. "Then the time has come to show the Queen that the Reach is not to be trifled with. We must bolster our forces, begin forging alliances beyond our borders if possible." Margaery nodded in agreement. "The seeds of war have been sown, but perhaps with the might of the Reach united behind us, we can survive this, maybe even reshape the realm for the better." Jaime exhaled, the tension in his shoulders mounting. He pictured Cersei in the Red Keep, eyes aglow with fury, spinning new plots. He knew the carnage she was capable of. Yet he also knew that in Highgarden, among the Tyrells, he had a chance to break free of the old cycle of violence and madness. War was coming, but for the first time in his life, Jaime Lannister felt that he might be fighting for something more than mere survival or someone else's ambition. He was fighting for a future he had chosen, and for a wife whose steadfast grace and determination had awakened a spark of hope within him. The golden fields of the Reach stretched out as far as the eye could see, shimmering like a promise under the midday sun. Jaime silently vowed that he would not let those fields burn without a fight. If toppling Tyrell power from within had once been the fear, now he realized that power was theirs to wield together, against a queen whose wrath threatened to consume them all. He turned to Margaery, meeting her gaze. She offered a small, resolute smile. There, in her eyes, he saw their shared destiny. Together, they would make their stand. And no matter what blood would be shed in the days ahead, neither the Lion nor the Rose would bow willingly to Cersei Lannister's tyranny again. Jaime rose before dawn the next morning, burdened by the knowledge that a second war seemed inevitable. For weeks, he had been building the Reach's defenses and forging alliances. Yet now, with Cersei's envoy gone and her ultimatum refused, the moment for half measures had passed. In the quiet pre-dawn light of Highgarden, the hallways stood vacant, save for a few servants hurrying by with trays of bread for the morning meal. Jaime nodded politely to them, but his mind was fixed on the tasks that lay ahead. He felt each footstep echo against the stone floors, as though every soft thud marked the beat of a war drum somewhere out in the hills. He found himself drifting toward the courtyard where the Tyrell guards went through early drills. There was Randyll Tarly, hands clasped behind his back, barking commands at a line of young men struggling to keep their spear formations tight. The familiar ring of steel against wood punctuated the crisp air, and as Jaime came closer, Tarly turned and inclined his head in a terse greeting. "Sir Jaime," Tarly said, voice clipped, "you're about early." "I've had trouble sleeping," Jaime admitted. He surveyed the yard. Men wearing tabards of green and gold, half of them fresh recruits from outlying regions. "If we're to face Lannister soldiers soon, they'll need more than morning routines. Have you begun the extended drills?" Tarly nodded. "They have. I'm running exercises twice daily. We'll train them to fight in disciplined ranks. The Reach's strength has always been in numbers, but numbers mean little if they scatter at the first sign of a cavalry charge. They'll learn to hold the line." Jaime watched for a moment, noting some men from House Rowan, House Seri, even a few Oakhearts. Formerly, they would have marched under the Tyrell banner alone, but now gold lions were stitched on the edges of the green field. A quiet acknowledgement of Jaime's new standing as consort to Margaery and potential co-ruler in the future. He could sense a cautious acceptance in most of the men. After all, if their lords had sworn to Lady Margaery's alliance, the small folk and rank-and-file soldiers would follow suit. "Good," Jaime said at last. "Keep them moving forward, and let's make sure their archers are well supplied. We'll need strong bowmen if Cersei's forces come near the city walls." Tarly sent him a grim half-smile. It's a relief to have a man here who knows the difference between real warfare and tourney play. I won't lie. I still have my misgivings about this entire arrangement, but I prefer a fight in the open to skulking around in the shadows. At least now I know where I stand. Jaime understood. Randyll Tarly was a soldier at heart, proud and unyielding. He had endured the War of the Five Kings with minimal losses, commanding respect from all corners of Westeros. "And you stand with House Tyrell and me now," Jaime said. "If you have any concerns, voice them." For a brief moment, Tarly considered. "My only concern is whether you can truly abandon your sister. The Queen is not known to forget slights." "She's not," Jaime said softly, "but I've made my choice, for reasons that go deeper than petty ambition. Cersei will never see it that way, though. She'll believe this is betrayal, pure and simple." Tarly's eyes flickered. "Betrayal is often in the eye of the beholder," said Jaime. "The men in these ranks don't care as much for the subtlety of loyalties. They want strong leadership and safety. If you show them that, they'll stay by your side." Jaime inclined his head. He thanked Tarly for his candor, then turned to move deeper into the courtyard. Above him, the ramparts glowed a light gold in the sun's first rays, as though the stones themselves were warming to the day. With each passing moment, the castle stirred. Stable boys appeared to tend horses, yawning maids collected fresh water from the well, and knights readied themselves for another day of organizational chaos. Highgarden was abuzz with preparation because they all sensed something was on the horizon. As Jaime made his way toward the central keep, he glanced up at Margaery's balcony. It was empty, the shutters open, the bedchamber behind them quiet. He wondered if she still slept or if she was already at her morning routine. Reading letters, meeting with Olenna, dispatching instructions to the stewards. Margaery always seemed to be in motion. Her ability to manage small details while simultaneously orchestrating grand strategies left Jaime marveling at her energy. He felt a flicker of genuine admiration, alongside a deeper, more tentative stirring of affection. It was still new, the sense that he belonged to someone who was neither his twin nor a fleeting lover, but a true partner in the dance of power. He found himself adjusting the golden hand at his side. The quiet mornings in Casterly Rock felt like a distant dream. So did the madness of King's Landing. He was no stranger to large-scale conflicts, yet this was the first time he felt any sense of righteous cause behind it. He had always fought for duty or for the crown, or simply to survive. Now he was fighting for the possibility of a different future, for the Reach, for Margaery, and maybe for himself. He headed to the castle's great hall, where the earliest risers might already be gathering for breakfast. Sure enough, Margaery was there, seated at a smaller table near the dais with her grandmother, Olenna, and a few other attendants. Platters of fruit, freshly baked bread, and cheese adorned the table. The Queen of Thorns was sipping tea and muttering under her breath about the price of saffron from Volantis, while Margaery listened patiently. When Olenna spotted Jaime, she waved him over with imperious quickness. "Come, come," Olenna said, rapping her knuckles on the table. "You look as though you've been up all night plotting the downfall of the entire realm. Sit and have something to eat." Margaery flashed him a small smile, gesturing to a vacant seat beside her. "You're up early, my lord," she said, voice warm. "I was about to send for you." Jaime took his seat, nodding in greeting to both women. "I wanted to check on the soldiers' drills. Randyll Tarly is pushing them hard. Better they break a sweat now," Olenna said, "than break ranks when Queen Cersei's men come." She set down her tea with a clink of porcelain. "We've had a raven from the arbor this morning. Lord Paxter Redwine says he's prepared his fleet and stands by for any call to defend Old Town or Highgarden's ports. But he also wants a guarantee that we won't drag him into a war with no end in sight." Margaery's voice was measured. "We'll reassure him that if war comes, it will be swift. Our alliance is strong enough to force a negotiation or a quick resolution. In truth, that's what we aim for. Isn't it?" Jaime cut a piece of bread, considering. "We aim for it, yes, but Cersei might not be satisfied unless she breaks us entirely." She's lost so much, her children, her father, her sense of control. In her eyes, we're just another blow to her power. She'd rather see the Reach on its knees than come to terms. Olenna made a disparaging sound. And she'd rather see us all starve than let us retain control of these harvests. The moment her men march, we'll have to respond in kind. She narrowed her eyes. Speaking of which, what of the lesser houses scattered across the southwestern fiefs? They haven't all declared openly. Some might be wavering, waiting to see which side emerges stronger. Margaery brushed a stray curl from her cheek. I've scheduled a progress through those lands in a fortnight, a riding tour to speak with their lords directly. It might do some good for them to see us in person, hear our assurances. I plan to take a modest escort, show confidence without intimidation. Jaime's chest tightened at the thought of Margaery traveling so far from Highgarden's walls. I'll accompany you, he said at once. We can't risk your safety on those roads. If there's any chance of bandits or covert attacks from Cersei's supporters, you'll need more than a token guard. Margaery nodded, meeting his eyes gratefully. Of course. Olenna eyed them both over the rim of her teacup. Her pointed gaze suggested she was reading more in Jaime's protective tone than mere alliance. But she said nothing on that matter. Instead, she resumed complaining about the inflated price of imported luxuries, while Margaery took a quick bite of bread, lost in thought. After breakfast, Jaime parted ways with Margaery to draft letters that needed his signature as co-ruler of Highgarden's domain. The notion still felt odd. Jaime had never craved the mantle of governance. During his youth, he had dreamed only of knightly glory. Even later, he had served as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, a role of prestige but little political power. Now, he signed proclamations about road tolls, farmland disputes, and resource allocations. It was both tedious and strangely fulfilling to see immediate impact on the realm around him. By midday, he found himself in a well-appointed study off the main corridor, quills, ink, and parchment spread before him. A large window overlooked the orchard, where trees drooped with pears and pomegranates. He was halfway through drafting a letter to House Hightower, seeking confirmation of their continued neutrality or, better yet, subtle support, when a knock sounded at the door. He turned to find Ser Bronn of the Blackwater, leaning lazily against the doorway. Bronn had arrived in Highgarden 2 days ago with a small retinue of Sellswords turned knights, explaining that while the Lannisters in King's Landing no longer offered him easy coin, he was willing to see what his old friend Jaime was up to. Jaime wasn't entirely sure if he trusted Bronn's motives, but he knew the man's cunning and skill in battle could be useful. Busy scribbling away, are you? Bronn observed. Never pictured you as one for correspondence. Jaime laid the quill aside, stretching his stiff fingers. Desperate times, old friend. There's more to war than swords and spears. There's farmland, coin, politics. Bronn let out a grunt. I'd rather leave that nonsense to the likes of you and Lady Margaery. I'm a simpler man. Show me the enemy, show me the gold, and let me at it. That said, I hear you might be needing some extra hands, if Cersei marches south. Jaime regarded him carefully. That's an understatement. I won't deny we need every blade. But I also know you'd prefer gold in hand before pledging yourself. Bronn shrugged. Not quite. I expect gold, yes, but I also expect a place in the New Order if you lot manage to pull this off. Lord of some keep or other. Isn't that what you promised me? Back when you were more partial to the idea of paying me my due. Jaime felt a pang of memory. Bronn's repeated demands to be properly rewarded for his loyalty. I remember. You'll have your reward, Bronn, if you stick with us. The Tyrell coffers are deep. Your cunning could be invaluable, and once all this ends, we'll see you comfortably landed. Bronn scratched his chin. Well, I'll hold you to that. In the meantime, I've got a handful of men I trust. Good fighters. They can help train these farm boys who think marching in a row means they know how to hold a sword. If you want, I'll start tomorrow. Jaime offered a tight nod. We need the help. Randyll Tarly is drilling them in formations, but more perspective can't hurt. I want them to be lethal in close-quarters engagements, too. Cersei will have some formidable knights under her banner. Bronn smirked. Close quarters? That's where I shine. He pushed off the wall, tossing a final glance around the study. I'll see you at supper then. Jaime watched him depart, feeling oddly grateful for the man's presence. Bronn might be self-serving, but he was also a survivor with a nose for which side was truly winning. The fact that Bronn was staying implied he sensed there was real strength in Highgarden's cause, something worth staking his fortunes on. He returned to his letter, finishing the last few lines of diplomatic pleasantries. Then he sealed it with a fresh wax stamp. A lion and rose intertwined, the device Margaery had suggested they use for official joint letters. The tiny image looked almost too beautiful to represent war and strife, but perhaps that was the point. If they could present unity, they might avert some of the worst bloodshed. Days lengthened into a week, then another, as the heat of late summer cast golden light across the rolling fields. Margaery's planned progress through the southwestern fiefs drew closer. The morning of her departure dawned bright and hot. Servants bustled about the courtyard, preparing a modest escort of knights, grooms, and handmaidens. Margaery stood near her horse, speaking to Olenna, who eyed the retinue like a hawk assessing the strength of its prey. "I still think you should bring more guards," Olenna said, tapping her cane on the cobblestones. "Cersei's made no direct moves yet, and that's precisely why I mistrust the situation. She might have cutthroats lurking anywhere along the roads." Margaery touched her grandmother's hand. "I understand, but if I ride in with 100 soldiers, it'll look like I'm trying to intimidate rather than reassure these lords. We decided a lighter guard would be best." Olenna pursed her lips. "At least you have Ser Jaime and Ser Tarly. Between them, I suppose they can keep you safe." Jaime approached on his own horse, the reins clutched in his flesh and blood hand. He'd opted for functional riding leathers, with only a light breastplate. His golden hand, polished anew, glinted beneath the sunshine. Behind him, Randyll Tarly sat astride a sturdy destrier, expression impassive. Olenna waved him over. "Be sure to keep those wits about you, Lannister. You may have one fewer hand, but presumably you still have enough sense not to let my granddaughter get stabbed in the back." Jaime gave her a level look. "I'll protect her with my life. You needn't worry." Margaery gently embraced her grandmother. "I'll return soon, grandmother. Don't let the lords at court pester you too much while I'm gone." Olenna sniffed. "I rather enjoy pestering them back, dear. Now off with you. Try not to get yourself killed, and do try to glean some good intelligence from these southwestern lords. We need to know where they truly stand, not just the courteous words they'll say to your face." With that, Margaery mounted her mare. She wore a riding cloak in Tyrell green, pinned with a golden rose at her shoulder. Jaime spurred his horse to her side, and Tarly formed up with a dozen well-armed knights. Several wagons followed, carrying supplies, tents, and provisions for the 2-week journey. A cluster of ladies-in-waiting and stewards rode behind. Altogether, it was a moderate traveling party, enough to show status without turning heads as a threatening force. They trotted out of Highgarden's gates, the early sun casting long shadows before them. Below the castle, the roads spread like strands of a great tapestry, weaving through farmland and villages. The party headed southwest, aiming first for the seat of House Oakhart, then continuing through the coastal regions. Margaery planned to meet with smaller lords and landed knights along the way, forging personal ties that might prove crucial if a real war began. The air smelled of sun-warmed grass and wildflowers, a far cry from the reek of King's Landing or the gloom of the northern roads Jaime had once ridden. As they traveled, small folk paused in their tasks, plowing fields, tending livestock to watch them pass. Some recognized Margaery or her banners and waved enthusiastically, grateful for the Tyrell presence. The supply wagons stopped in a few villages to distribute bread and salt, a symbolic gesture of goodwill. Margaery would always take a moment to dismount, greet the local headman or woman, and offer a listening ear to their concerns. Jaime found himself standing watch during these exchanges, ensuring no threat lurked among the crowd. But there was rarely a hint of malice in these folks' eyes, only hope that Lady Margaery would keep them safe. Come dusk on the second day, The entourage reached a large inn near a bend in a wooded road. Margaery decided they would spend the night there, rather than press on to Oakhart lands in the dark. The innkeeper scurried about, making rooms available to the highest lords first. Jaime and Margaery were offered a private chamber on the second floor, something that did not escape the notice of the traveling knights, who politely busied themselves with their own accommodations. They took a modest supper in that chamber: stew, fresh bread, and a jug of ale. By candlelight, Jaime and Margaery discussed the day's progress. She had spoken with 2 small landholders that afternoon, knights sworn to House Oakhart who oversaw a patch of farmland and a logging outpost. Both had assured her of their loyalty, praising her father Mace for providing seeds and livestock during the prior harvest. Yet there was an undercurrent of fear. Rumor said the crown might dispatch smaller strike forces to harass the southern boundaries. No official battle had begun. These knights worried about being caught between Tyrell commands and crown retribution. "They'll swear fealty to us face to face," Margaery said, pushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "But behind closed doors, they wonder if we can protect them from Cersei's wrath. If she sends even a few hundred men to burn their villages, who would come to their aid in time?" Jaime frowned. "We can't station large garrisons in every corner of the Reach, but we can promise swift retaliation against any crown incursion, perhaps." He tapped the tabletop with his golden hand, the metal producing a hollow note. "We should impress upon them that harming any Tyrell loyalist will provoke an immediate muster of forces. If Cersei wants to wage war, we'll make it cost her. That might reassure them that they're not alone." Margaery folded her hands. "Yes, though it's still a gamble. The small folk and lesser knights fear Cersei because she's proven ruthless. They need to believe we're just as capable of harsh consequences if the crown violates their lands. It's unpleasant, but sometimes fear can be a currency as strong as love." Jaime nodded grimly. "My father used to say the same. Fear and love in equal measure. The lion can roar, but it can also protect." She leaned back in her chair, allowing a small, tired sigh. "We'll see if our oath of protection is enough. I hope not to push them into thinking this will be a brutal war. I'd rather avoid a conflict that scorches the entire Reach. We all remember the devastation during the War of the Five Kings." Jaime agreed silently. He had seen too many burnt towns and mass graves. The memory of the Riverlands ravaged by Gregor Clegane still haunted him. If there was any chance to keep the battles contained, they would have to be cunning and swift. But so long as Cersei refused to negotiate, they would be forced to fight. They finished their meal in contemplative silence. When the servants cleared away the dishes, Margaery rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the yard below. Jaime joined her, noticing the half-moon rising in a sky awash with stars. Below, knights milled about, sharing a mug of ale near a cookfire. A few stable hands tended the horses. Fireflies sparked in the darkness just beyond the inn's fence, tiny lanterns floating in the gloom. Margaery drew closer. "Sometimes," she said softly, "I wish we could just leave it all behind. The wars, the politics, all of it. Find a quiet place on some hillside, live simply. But we were born to houses that shape the realm, for better or worse. We can't escape that." Jaime rested his flesh hand on the windowsill. "We can't," he agreed. "I tried to run once, not physically but emotionally, to discard my father's expectations, the illusions of knighthood. It left me hollow. Now I see a different purpose." He glanced at her face, illuminated by the moonlight. "Maybe there's a way to bring stability without repeating the cruelties of the past." She turned to him, searching his eyes, and for a moment he forgot the precarious war they stood on the brink of. In the hush of that moment, it was just the two of them, husband and wife, forging a bond that neither had expected. He reached up, his golden hand immobile at his side, but with his real hand, he gently touched her cheek. She leaned into the contact, eyes half-lidded. Then she closed the gap, pressing her lips to his, a slow, tentative kiss, a question answered by mutual need. The softness of her mouth, the subtle taste of ale on her lips, the warmth of her body leaning into him. It reawakened something Jaime had thought long buried. Not quite the same fervor he'd once felt with Cersei. No, but perhaps something healthier, calmer, more honest. When they broke apart, a faint flush adorned her cheeks. "We should rest," she whispered, her voice a little breathless. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Jaime nodded, swallowing. Yes, they moved apart, but that lingering sense of intimacy remained as they prepared for the night. Outside the window, a lone owl called into the stillness, a haunting echo that reminded Jaime how ephemeral peace could be. For now, though the darkness felt less oppressive, buoyed by the promise that, together, they might stand a chance against the storms gathering on the horizon. Their progress continued deeper into southwestern Reach territory. Margaery spent hours each day meeting local lords, graciously accepting hospitality in modest castle halls or ancestral manors that seemed dwarfed by Highgarden's grandeur. Each stop featured either a small feast or a midday meal, at which Margaery, sometimes accompanied by Jaime, explained that the Tyrell Lannister union was firm and dedicated to defending the region from all threats. Jaime mostly observed the interplay, stepping in when questions of crown retribution arose. He had enough knowledge of Cersei's methods to quell panic or fan cautious resolution. And so, piece by piece, they gathered pledges of loyalty, not always enthusiastic, but at least outwardly compliant. Throughout these meetings, Randyll Tarly maintained a vigilant presence. He said little, but his stern gaze often spoke volumes. And behind the scenes, Tarly's men quietly gathered intelligence. Sightings of Crown scouts, suspicious travelers, any sign that Cersei had begun sabotaging the roads. Jaime found no solid evidence of open Crown aggression, yet he suspected that Cersei was still mustering her strength, uncertain how or when to strike. On the 8th day of their journey, the party arrived at Old Oak, seat of House Oakhart, a venerable house known for its proud knights and storied lineage. Lord Oakhart greeted them with careful courtesy, showing them into a grand hall adorned with tapestries of oak leaves and acorns. A large stone hearth flickered with a newly set fire, casting dancing shadows against walls hung with old swords and shields from past battles. Lord Oakhart himself was a man in his early 50s, stocky and broad-shouldered, with streaks of gray in his hair. He offered Margaery a polite bow, then cast a measuring look at Jaime. "Lady Margaery, Sir Jaime, welcome to Old Oak. My house is honored by your visit." Margaery thanked him, praising Old Oak's storied past. She expressed hope that House Oakhart would stand firm with the Tyrell Lannister alliance if darker days came. Lord Oakhart's expression shifted uneasily. I've no love for the current queen, that's true enough," he muttered, glancing at his steward. "But I'm not eager for war either. Old Oak's people have only just recovered from the last troubles. War is costly for us all." Jaime heard this refrain many times on the journey. "No one here wants war," he responded calmly. "But if the crown forces our hand, we must be ready. Cersei Lannister has already declared her intentions. She wants our submission. We've refused. Any house that stands with us will be on her list of targets." Margaery's voice softened. "Which is precisely why we must stand together. If we all remain unified, the crown will find it impossible to isolate and destroy any one castle or region without paying a steep price." Lord Oakhart exhaled, thick brows furrowing. He seemed torn. "I hear your words, my lady, and I've no wish to see our fields torched. My men are well drilled, and I have some measure of storehouse kept. Perhaps a show of readiness will dissuade the queen from any rash action." Margaery nodded. "Exactly. Strength in numbers, my lord. We'll pass through your lands on our way further south. But I hope when the time comes, we can count on Old Oak spears and swords." Lord Oakhart gave a final nod, signaling agreement at least on the surface. They soon settled in for a midday feast in the hall. The Oakhart banners draped the walls, and a string of local minstrels played softly in one corner. The talk veered between local harvest yields and the health of Old Oak's orchard. Jaime partook of the meal politely, exchanging occasional glances with Margaery that said, "He's uncertain, but not hostile." We can likely secure him if war comes. After the feast, Lord Oakhart insisted on taking his guests to see the ancient oak grove near the castle. Trees said to date back centuries. Jaime and Margaery walked among towering oaks, their branches forming a green canopy overhead. Motes of sunlight speckled the forest floor. The old trees exuded a sense of timelessness, unperturbed by the petty struggles of lords and kings. The hush among those mighty trunks made Jaime feel small, and in a rare moment, he reflected on how fleeting mortal ambitions could be. Houses rose and fell. The land endured, yet he had no time for deeper reveries. Their progress demanded they move on by late afternoon, so they took leave of Old Oak, collecting more or less the same promise of cautious loyalty. As they rode away, Jaime glanced back at the castle's sturdy walls, wondering if its next messenger from King's Landing would demand fealty to the crown, an offer that might become all the more tempting when Cersei showed her teeth. By the 12th day, the party was weary. The southwestern fields glimmered under relentless sun. The roads baked hard and dusty. Margaery had insisted on continuing, determined to meet every local knight and petty lord she could before returning to Highgarden. Jaime admired her resolve. Despite the heat and long hours in the saddle, she never lost her courteous manner. His own shoulders ached from the repetitive motion of riding, and though he tried not to show it, balancing in the saddle with only one good hand left him more fatigued than he remembered in his youth. They made camp near a shallow stream one evening, deciding they would stop for the night rather than push on to the next village in darkness. Randyll Tarly oversaw the watch rotations, positioning sentries along the tree line and near the dirt road. Tents sprang up in orderly rows, and the traveling cooks set up a field kitchen. The knights relaxed somewhat, content to be out of the saddle at least for a few hours. The ladies-in-waiting bustled about Margaery's tent, arranging her bedroll and fetching fresh water for washing. Jaime helped erect his own small tent nearby. He had nearly finished hammering the final stake, awkwardly with his golden hand bracing the rope, when Margaery came over, her cloak draped across one arm. "You're surprisingly adept at that," she teased gently, watching him. "Most lords would have a squire do the work." Jaime gave a lopsided shrug. "I've never minded doing things myself, though I admit it's clumsy now." He glanced at the gilded fingers. "But it's good to keep busy." Margaery's gaze lingered on the stump of his right wrist. "I've never told you, but I do admire your determination, not just in war, but in adapting to the losses you've endured." Jaime stood, dusting off his breeches. "I learned the hard way that self-pity accomplishes nothing. And with everything that's happened, losing my father, losing Tommen, turning from Cersei, I suppose I needed to find a new anchor." He met Margaery's eyes, letting the unspoken implication rest between them. Her smile was subtle, touched with empathy. "Well, you've found it, I hope. We need you whole and resolute if we're to see this alliance through." They talked a while longer about the route ahead, about the prospects for a final audience with a minor bannerman the next day. Then, a distant call from Tarly summoned Jaime to help address some logistical question. Margaery returned to her tent, leaving Jaime with a mixture of warmth and anxiety swirling in his chest. When he reached Tarly, the man stood near the stream's edge, arms folded as he observed a group of knights fussing over a broken cart wheel. Beyond them, the horses drank from the gently flowing water. "We've gotten word from one of the outriders," Tarly began without preamble. "There are travelers on the road to the southeast, about 24, making slow progress. Could be merchants, but the outrider said they're too heavily armed for simple traders." Jaime's posture tensed. "Any banners?" Tarly's brows drew together. "None that he could see. The outrider tried to get closer, but they posted lookouts. He thinks they may have recognized him as a scout." Jaime grimaced. "Bandits or crown soldiers trying to move inconspicuously? We can't be sure." "Precisely. They could also be mercenaries who've heard rumor of conflict in the Reach, hoping to profit. In any case, they're headed in our direction. We could set up a watch or intercept them if necessary." Jaime glanced at the sun dipping behind the trees. "If they're heading this way, we should prepare. I won't have them stumble upon our camp unchallenged." double the sentries. If they're merchants, they can wait until morning to approach properly. Tarly nodded. Agreed. I'll position men on the ridge above the road. If these strangers come too close, we'll hail them. Darkness fell swiftly. The campfires glowed in small clusters, and the knights spoke in hushed tones about the possible identity of the travelers. Jaime could see the worry in their eyes. Peaceful though this journey had been so far, all it would take was one band of assassins or crown raiders to turn it into a bloodbath. He made a final circuit of the camp, ensuring the sentries were alert, then entered his tent, too restless to sleep. He unbuckled his sword belt, set it on a wooden stand near the entrance, and sat on a simple folding stool to remove his boots. The night air was still warm, carrying the faint chirping of insects. Hours passed in uneasy half-sleep, his mind flitting through every scenario. Sometimes, he drifted into nightmares. Images of wildfire explosions, of Cersei's face twisted in fury, of burning fields where Lannister and Tyrell banners merged in the smoke. Near midnight, a faint commotion rustled outside. Raised voices, the shuffle of boots on grass. Jaime bolted upright, instantly alert. He grabbed his sword, fastening the belt around his waist. A moment later, he stepped outside to see Randyll Tarly striding across the campsite, face grimly set. Torches bobbed around them as knights stirred from their bedrolls. Jaime hurried to intercept Tarly. "What is it?" Tarly gestured toward a cluster of riders who'd arrived at the perimeter of the camp. Maybe 5 men. The rest presumably waited on the road. They carried no visible sigils, but their armor looked too fine for common brigands. Tarly lowered his voice. "They showed up claiming they have important news for Lady Margaery and you. They refused to speak it to anyone else." Suspicion prickled along Jaime's neck. "They're crown agents?" Tarly shrugged. "Possibly. I don't like it, but they haven't drawn steel. They keep saying they've come to talk, not fight." Jaime's gaze flicked to Margaery's tent, about 30 paces away. He spotted movement. Likely her ladies-in-waiting had woken her. "Let me speak to them. If it's a trap, we'll find out quickly enough." He and Tarly approached the 5 strangers, knights by their bearing. The tallest among them lowered his hood, revealing a thin face with close-cropped hair and a cunning glint in his eyes. "Sir Jaime Lannister?" he asked quietly. Jaime inclined his head, one hand on the hilt of his sword. "Aye, state your business." "We come on behalf of a certain concerned party in King's Landing," the man said, carefully avoiding direct reference to the Queen. "We have tidings that may be of interest to you and your lady. We ask an audience in private." Tarly snorted. "You'll speak here or not at all." Jaime raised his flesh hand to silence Tarly. "I will hear you, but be quick. My men are on edge." A flicker of satisfaction crossed the stranger's face. "My men and I escorted a traveler from the Crownlands, a man who claims to be in possession of knowledge that could change your entire conflict with the Queen. He waits with the rest of our group down the road. We humbly request a chance to bring him here so that you may hear what he has to say." Jaime's wariness deepened. "If this is a trick, you'll pay for it with your lives." "I understand," the man said simply, "but I beg you to trust that he comes in good faith." At that moment, Margaery emerged from behind Tarly, her cloak hastily thrown over her nightdress, hair loose around her shoulders. She stepped into the light of the torches, eyes scanning the strangers. "Is everything all right?" Jaime glanced at her, heart pounding. He didn't want her in harm's way, but he also knew she had a right to decide how to proceed. "These knights say they've brought someone from the Crownlands who wishes to speak to us privately. We suspect subterfuge, but they claim otherwise." Margaery studied the strangers. "Who is this traveler?" The hooded man bowed slightly. "I cannot name him without his permission, my lady, but I swear on my honor, he only wishes to parley." Margaery weighed her options. The entire camp waited, knights fingering their swords, handmaidens clutching blankets in the shadows. Finally, Margaery made a decision. "Let him come, but only with you 5 accompanying him. No one else. My men will surround the area, and if there's any sign of treachery, you'll all die swiftly." A murmur of assent passed through Tarly's men. The hooded man bowed again. "Thank you, my lady. I'll send for him immediately." He nodded to one of his comrades, who wheeled his horse about and galloped back into the darkness. The rest remained, shifting nervously under the pointed stairs of Tyrell knights. Jaime took position beside Margaery, sword still sheathed but ready to draw in an instant. Tarly had archers nock arrows, waiting in the gloom behind the torchlight. The tension felt like a tight wire, humming with potential violence. Before long, hoofbeats sounded on the road. One more rider approached, flanked by the scout from earlier. The group halted just inside the torchlight, and the rider dismounted slowly. He wore a cloak of dark wool, the hood pulled low. When he lifted his head, Jaime's heart lurched. He recognized that face, older, thinner, more lined with hardship, but unmistakable all the same. "Uncle Kevan?" He breathed in disbelief. Kevan Lannister stared back with a grin set to his mouth, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Once the stalwart brother of Tywin Lannister and a steady voice in the small council, Kevan had vanished from official court dealings after Tommen's death and Cersei's coronation. Rumors suggested Cersei had forced him out, or perhaps he had fled to avoid her wrath. Now here he stood, late at night in a makeshift camp in the southwestern reach, carrying intangible tidings that might change everything. He bowed stiffly to Jaime, then turned the gesture to Margaery. "Sir Jaime, Lady Margaery, I'm sorry for the abrupt entrance, but my situation in King's Landing had grown untenable. I come with warnings and with an offer." Jaime felt a swell of complex emotion. Relief that his uncle was alive, suspicion about what he might be doing here, anger at how Cersei's rule had broken their house's unity. He measured Kevan's guarded expression. "Explain yourself." Kevan exhaled a shaky breath. "My nephew, your sister, has become more reckless than ever. She has conscripted Sel's words and formed new alliances with questionable men to muster a force she intends to unleash upon the Reach. I tried to counsel caution, but she would have none of it. She sees your marriage, Jaime, as the ultimate betrayal. She's convinced you must be punished, your death if necessary. She believes only a complete show of force will cow the Tyrells." A stir went rough the knights at Kevan's words. Tarly's jaw tightened, Margaery's eyes flashed with concern, and Jaime felt cold dread sink in. He had known Cersei would respond with force, but to hear Kevan confirm it hammered the reality home. "What about the gold, the resources?" Jaime pressed. "Can she even sustain a war?" Kevan nodded wearily. "She's taken extreme measures. She's sold off precious relics, borrowed money from anyone who will lend, including some free city bankers. She's also allied with men from the Stormlands who resent the Tyrell's influence. If she has her way, within a month or two, a new host will march south along the Rose Road, burning as they go. She wants to cut off supply lines, trap you in Highgarden, and starve you out." Jaime's stomach twisted. "So she's truly resolved to destroy us, no matter the cost to the realm?" "Yes," Kevan said heavily. "She blames you for desertion, sees Margaery's presence as a threat to her power. She's lost all reason, Jaime. Whatever affection she once had, it's twisted into hatred." Margaery spoke, her tone calm but shot through with tension. "Why come to warn us, Lord Kevan? You're a Lannister, her uncle. Why turn on her now?" Kevan turned to her. "Because I see the ruin this war will bring. I loved my brother Tywin, but his children have brought House Lannister to the brink. Tyrion's gone, you've rebelled, and Cersei is out of control. I want to preserve what remains of our legacy and the realm. I believe the Reach stands a better chance under your rule than under my niece's tyranny." Tarly regarded him with a soldier's narrowed eyes. "Even if you do speak truth, how can you help us? You're one man." Kevan's expression hardened. "I still have loyal men. Some Lannister retainers who refuse to serve under Cersei's madness. They're hidden for now, but if I join with you, we can strike back at her new allies before they fully gather. I know which roads they'll take, which lords might buckle under intimidation. We can outmaneuver her." A preemptive blow, carefully timed, might spare the Reach from the worst of the destruction. Jaime stepped closer to his uncle, searching his eyes. "And you would lead us against your own niece?" Kevan closed his eyes briefly. "My own niece, yes, because I cannot stand by and watch her burn the realm. I swore to uphold our house's honor, and she's trampling it underfoot. If the realm starves, if the fields burn, if thousands die, what honor remains for the lion's name?" Silence stretched. Around them, the knights exchanged glances, uncertain if they should trust this new development. Margaery studied Kevan's face intently, as though reading the lines of regret and conviction etched there. Then she turned to Jaime. "What do you think?" Jaime took a measured breath, remembering Kevan's steadfastness in times past. He recalled how Kevan had often tempered Tywin's harsher impulses, and how he tried to guide Tommen's regency gently before Cersei seized full power. If there was any Lannister left who might still care about the realm's welfare, it was Kevan. "I believe him," Jaime said at last. "My uncle isn't one for deception. If he says Cersei is raising an army, I have no reason to doubt him." He paused, shifting his gaze to Kevan. "And if he offers to help us counter her, I think we should let him." Margaery hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Very well, Lord Kevan. If you can truly guide us to disrupt her war machine before it engulfs the Reach, I will accept your offer. But if this is some ploy..." Kevan inclined his head solemnly. "I understand, Lady Margaery. My life is in your hands now. I only ask that you consider peace once Cersei's immediate threat is ended." Margaery's eyes flicked toward Jaime. "Peace is exactly what we want, though Cersei may not give us a choice but to fight." Randall Tarly cleared his throat. "If there's a plan to strike first, we'll need details. Who are these new allies? Where are they gathering?" Kevan answered, weary but resolute. "They're gathering at Hayford, just east of King's Landing, and in parts of the Stormlands. Word is that men from House Fell and Buckler, among others, have joined her cause, partly out of old grudges and partly for the promise of gold. Cersei's also courted a band of mercenaries from Essos, though I don't know how many. They aim to march in separate columns, converge near the Rose Road, and push south." Jaime absorbed this quickly. "That means they could be in the Reach within a month or two, depending on how fast they muster. If we strike them en route, hit supply lines, ambush columns, we could slow or break them." Tarly nodded grimly. "A dangerous but viable strategy. If we wait for them to come to us, we risk a siege. Better to face them on ground of our choosing." Margaery stepped forward, the torchlight illuminating her determined features. "We should not tarry on this road any longer, then. If war is truly imminent, we must return to Highgarden at once and prepare. Lord Kevan, you'll come with us. Ser Jaime, Ser Tarly, summon our men. We ride at first light." Though it was nearly midnight, the camp erupted into orderly commotion. Tents were struck, wagons reloaded, horses readied. The shadows of men and women flickered across the grass, urgency spurring them on. Kevan's band of knights merged tentatively with the Tyrell soldiers, tension evident but overshadowed by necessity. Margaery's ladies prepared her belongings in hushed efficiency. Jaime caught a moment alone with Margaery in the midst of the scramble, softly laying a hand on her arm. She turned to him, and for a beat, her eyes reflected the torchlight. Fear and resolve mingled in equal measure. "War, then?" she whispered. "Truly war." He nodded slowly. "There's no avoiding it now. I'm sorry." She squared her shoulders. "Don't be. I knew what this alliance entailed. I just hoped we might have more time. We'll do everything we can," Jaime promised. "We'll fight on our terms, not Cersei's." She lifted her chin. "Yes, and we'll protect the Reach, no matter the cost." Moments later, she moved off to issue new orders, her cloak swirling in the restless night air. Jaime stood watching, a cold flame ignited in his chest. He thought of Cersei back in the Red Keep, forging alliances with men who cared nothing for the realm's well-being. He thought of how many times he had stood by her side, ignoring the moral rot spreading beneath their feet. Now that rot was about to erupt into open warfare, threatening everything he stood for in this new life. He turned to find Kevan regarding him, an unspoken sorrow etched on his face. Jaime stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Uncle, whatever happens, remember that I'd have chosen another path if it existed." Kevan laid a hand on Jaime's shoulder. "I know, nephew, so would I, but the wheel grinds on, and we're all caught in it." They exchanged a final, pained look before resuming their tasks. By the time the moon had traveled halfway across the sky, the camp was ready to depart. In tight formation, they moved northward, intending to arc around toward Highgarden by a safer route less likely to harbor watchers from the crown. The torches bobbed like will-o'-the-wisps in the dark, leading them away from the southwestern roads. Jaime rode at the head of the column with Margaery and Tyrell, Kevan Lannister close behind. The night was eerily silent, save for the jingle of harnesses and the muffled thud of hooves on earth. The horizon seemed vast and featureless, the stars overhead indifferent to mortal strife. Yet within Jaime's chest, the tension coiled ever tighter. Soon they would stand once more behind the walls of Highgarden, forced to plan the next move in a conflict that might engulf the entire south of Westeros. The alliance he and Margaery had forged, first out of politics, then shaped by genuine respect, would be tested in the crucible of blood and fire. At last, a faint glow of sunrise tinted the eastern sky. The line of riders pressed on, dust rising in their wake. In the new day's light, the threats and hopes of the night took on sharper edges. Jaime inhaled the cool dawn air, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of grim purpose that went beyond personal redemption or devotion to a single person. He was fighting for a cause that mattered: the security of the Reach, the chance to break a cycle of vicious, consuming power plays. Cersei would come or he would go to her. Either way, the lines were drawn. Jaime only hoped that when the final blow fell, he would not regret the path he had chosen, because he already knew that some choices, once made, could never be undone. When the group arrived back at Highgarden days later, the castle gates swung open to admit them. Olenna Tyrell and Mace Tyrell were waiting in the courtyard, flanked by anxious retainers. They had received Margaery's raven and were prepared to hear urgent news. They did not, however, expect to see Kevan Lannister riding in alongside them. The moment Kevan dismounted, Olenna's sharp gaze fixed on him like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "You brought us a Lannister? Another one?" Olenna snapped, not bothering with pleasantries. "I trust there's a good reason." Margaery slid off her horse, graceful even in her travel-worn state. "Grandmother, father, this is Kevan Lannister, uncle to Jaime. He's come with grave tidings about Cersei's planned offensive." Mace Tyrell puffed out his chest. "Grave tidings, you say? Well, let's hear it. If Cersei's plotting something, we need to know every detail. We can't let her threaten my Margaery or the Reach." He eyed Kevan warily, though his tone was more bluster than hatred. Kevan bowed stiffly. "Lord Tyrell, Lady Olenna, I am at your service, though I regret the circumstances." He launched into a concise account of what he had told Jaime and Margaery. Cersei's alliances, her mustering of troops in the Crownlands and the Stormlands, her intention to break the Tyrell-Lannister union by any means. The courtyard fell silent as he outlined the scale of the threat. Thousands of men, possibly bolstered by mercenaries, financed through desperate measures. Olenna's lips curled in distaste. "So the Queen has thrown all caution to the wind, and you, Lord Kevan, have come to us, presumably seeking to sabotage her efforts." "Yes, my lady," Kevan said firmly. "If I can help you destroy her newly forged armies before they sweep across the Reach, perhaps we can spare thousands of lives and force a negotiation." Olenna's eyebrows rose. "Destroy armies to spare lives? Sounds paradoxical, but I take your meaning. If she can't muster the strength to mount a full invasion, she'll have to talk." "Very well." She flicked her gaze to Mace. "Summon Randall Tarley, gather the captains of the guard, and call the lesser lords who remain at Highgarden. We'll need a war council at once." The courtyard buzzed as servants scattered to obey. Margaery exchanged a glance with Jaime. They both knew that this moment marked the final threshold. There would be no more polite half-measures, No more illusions of a quiet standoff. This was a war council, pure and simple. While Mace hustled to assemble everyone in the Great Hall, Olenna led them to a smaller solar for a private exchange. Once inside, she gestured for Kevan to sit, though she herself remained standing, tapping her cane on the floor. Margaery, Jaime, Tarly, and a couple of trusted advisors from House Tyrell stood in a semicircle, waiting for Kevan to elaborate. Olenna's voice was clipped. "Tell us exactly how many men the Queen can field. We've heard rumors from travelers, but we need something concrete." Kevan folded his hands in his lap. Between the Stormland lords who've aligned with her and the Crownland bannermen, she might muster around 12,000. Possibly more if the Sellswords from Esso's number in the thousands, but I've only heard speculation. Add to that the remains of the Lannister forces stationed in the Westerlands under certain banners who still hold some loyalty to the crown. She's promising gold, lands, titles, whatever it takes. Tarly's mouth thinned. 12,000 plus Sellswords is not a trivial army. We can match that, but we'd have to call the banners from across the Reach. That means time. Time in which she might move her troops forward. Olenna locked eyes with Kevan. "And you propose we strike at them first, catch them divided before they can merge into one unstoppable host?" Kevan inclined his head. "Yes, they're gathering in two main columns, one near Hayford, the other further south near Bronzegate, waiting for Stormland levies. If we launch a coordinated assault on both columns before they unite, we might shatter them. Or at least force a retreat so they can't march on the Rose Road." Margaery listened carefully, arms folded across her chest. "But that requires us to leave Highgarden, push our forces north and east. A long march. Meanwhile, another crown force could slip past us and strike at our rear or the farmland. It's risky. Less risky than waiting for them to gather," Kevan countered softly. "Once they converge, they'll march straight here. They could burn fields along the way, creating a famine even if they fail to take the castle. You know as well as I do that we rely on these harvests. Even a partial burn could cripple the Reach." Olenna sighed, her shoulders sagging momentarily. "He's right. Waiting invites a scorched earth campaign. Yet leaving Highgarden underdefended also invites infiltration. We'll need a strategy that ensures the castle isn't left vulnerable." Tarly cleared his throat. "I can lead one force toward Hayford, while another stays behind to guard the roads leading to Highgarden. We can set watchers on any route from the Stormlands. If Kevan truly knows the enemy's movements, we can strike them swiftly, break them, and withdraw before the second column can reinforce." Jaime considered. "Perhaps we can deploy multiple smaller forces. One commanded by Tarly to strike near Hayford, another under my command to hit the Stormland column near Bronzegate. The main Tyrell host remains in the central Reach, under Mace Tyrell or Lady Olenna, to safeguard the farmland and Highgarden." Margaery lifted her chin. "And I'll remain here helping coordinate supply lines. We'll watch for any sign of a third force." Her gaze flicked to Kevan. "You'll need to go with one of the strike forces, Lord Kevan. They'll need your knowledge of enemy positions." "I'll go with Tarly," Kevan answered. "Hayford's forces are mostly Crownlanders who served under my brother Tywin at one point or another. I know their captains, their strategies. It'll be the best place to use my insight." Olenna nodded briskly. "Then that's settled. Mace, you'll keep half the Tyrell forces here. Ser Jaime, you'll take the other half to the Stormlands approach. Randall Tarly, you coordinate with Kevan to deal with the Crownlander column. Strike fast, strike hard, then pull back. No lingering to chase stragglers." Jaime glanced at Margaery, a hint of worry in his expression. "Are you sure you'll be safe here with half the forces gone?" She gave him a reassuring smile. "Grandmother and father will remain with me. We have walls, we have men, and I trust that the enemy will be more concerned with your armies than with infiltration. Besides, if the Stormland forces are hammered before they can march, we may never see them at these gates." He inclined his head. "Very well," despite his confidence. A knot of fear coiled in his gut at the thought of leaving Margaery behind. But the plan was sound. Dividing their enemies before they united offered the best chance. Olenna clapped her hands. Enough dithering. We have a war to prepare for. Let's assemble the council in the Great Hall. Confirm the details with the other lords. Time is precious. They left the solar, dispersing down different corridors to relay instructions. Jaime's pulse hammered as he considered the logistics. Calling the banners, gathering enough provisions for a campaign, ensuring communication between the two strike forces. This was no minor skirmish but a full-blown confrontation with the crown, and it would be led by Lannisters on both sides. The thought chilled him, yet also part of him felt a fierce resolve. He had walked away from Cersei's shadow to choose a path he believed less destructive. Now he would stand by that choice and face her armies without flinching. The next week in Highgarden saw a whirlwind of activity. Ravens flew out to the lords across the reach, summoning their levies. Armors were repaired, swords sharpened, and wagons loaded with rations. Mace Tyrell oversaw the provisioning efforts, his bombastic tone alternating between encouraging and overbearing. Olenna Tyrell made sure no detail was overlooked, from forging alliances with House Redwine's fleet to ensuring Old Town's Hightower was on guard for any crown naval maneuver. Meanwhile, Margaery spent her days and nights coordinating the complex web of supply lines, corresponding with local stewards, and reassuring lesser lords that House Tyrell's leadership would protect them. Jaime found himself in the castle's armory more often than not, drilling new recruits, inspecting the ranks, mapping out routes on large parchment spreads. Every evening, a council met in a broad chamber near the fortress's heart, where they refined the plan. Randyll Tarly and Kevan Lannister would lead a force of roughly 6,000 men north, cutting east toward Hayford before the Crownland host could march. Their goal: to engage the enemy in quick, decisive strikes, then fall back into the Reach if the conflict dragged out. Jaime, accompanied by Bronn and a contingent of Tyrell knights, would move southeast to intercept the Stormland forces near the Wendwater or Bronzegate. They would hamper or destroy the Crown's southern allies, forcing them to retreat or pause until the possibility of uniting with the Hayford column vanished. Margaery, Olenna, and Mace Tyrell would command the main fortress garrison and reserves, nearly 7,000 or 8,000 men, concentrated around Highgarden. They would defend the castle and farmland, ready to reinforce either Jaime or Tarly if needed. It was a daring plan that relied on swift action and precise timing. If either strike force got bogged down or overwhelmed, the entire scheme might crumble. But the alternative, waiting for Cersei's combined host to march unopposed, seemed far worse. Late one night, a day before the armies were set to depart, Jaime sought Margaery in her private solar. He found her sitting at a desk piled high with letters and ledgers, the single candle illuminating her features in warm gold. She looked up at his entrance, weariness etched in her eyes. "Jaime," she said, voice quiet, "come in." He stepped forward, removing his gauntlets and setting them aside. "I won't stay long. I know you're busy, but I wanted to see you before I leave." She gestured to a chair. "Sit, please. I need a moment away from these blasted letters anyway." She pushed the parchment aside and leaned her elbows on the desk, studying his face. "Are you all set? Your men are ready," he exhaled. "As ready as we can be. Dawn tomorrow we ride out. I expect it'll take us several days to reach the Wendwater, depending on how swiftly the columns gather. Tarly and Kevan will likely set out at the same time, heading north." She nodded. "And we'll remain here, waiting for word. It's always the waiting that's hardest, not knowing if the next raven brings news of victory or defeat." After a moment, she stood and came around the desk, lightly placing a hand on Jaime's shoulder. "You'll do well. You're a seasoned commander, no matter what you once thought of yourself." He turned to face her, reaching up with his good hand to rest lightly on her waist. "I hope so. His voice trailed off. There were 1,000 fears swirling in his mind. Fear of failing, fear of losing men, fear of letting Margaery down, and a deeper fear of confronting Cersei's wrath on the battlefield. "I don't want to lose what we've built here," he finished softly. She gazed at him with gentle resolve. "We won't. You'll stop them before they cause devastation, and if the gods are good, we might force a truce." If not, well, we'll protect the Reach as best we can." He stepped closer, sliding his hand behind her back, drawing her into a light embrace. She let him, resting her head briefly against his chest. The faint rosewater scent of her hair stirred memories of their nights in the orchard-scented air. She lifted her face to his. "Jaime, promise me something. No matter how this ends, don't let regret consume you. We made this choice to stand against tyranny. You left your sister because you saw how poisonous her power had become. Don't doubt that choice, even if the cost is high." He swallowed hard, seeing the reflection of the candle flame in her eyes. "I won't doubt it," he murmured. "I know it's right." She stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his, an urgent, almost desperate kiss, as though aware that wars can separate even the strongest bonds. He kissed her back, golden hand curling gently against her back. For a moment, the world outside the walls disappeared, leaving only them, entwined in a hush of longing and fear for the days ahead. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "Be careful," she whispered. "I will," he said. "You be careful too. Don't let anyone breach these walls while I'm gone." A wry smile touched her lips. "If they try, they'll discover that roses have thorns." He squeezed her hand once more, then stepped away, heart pounding with a tumult of emotion. She turned back to her desk, retaking her seat, though her expression lingered on him with an unspoken goodbye. Jaime left the solar, footsteps echoing in the corridor, each step carrying him closer to the war he both dreaded and welcomed. At dawn, Highgarden's gates opened for 2 separate columns of marching troops. Banners of green and gold roses fluttered, interspersed with the newly minted sigil combining the Tyrell rose and the Lannister lion. Some men wore plain steel, while higher knights donned more ornate armor. The thunder of hooves and the clank of weapons reverberated off the castle walls as the armies assembled in orderly ranks. On the northward side, Randyll Tarly and Kevan Lannister led 6,000 men out the main gate. Kevan rode near Tarly, quietly pointing out which squadrons could move fastest, which knights had the best discipline. Tarly's face was grim, determined to crush the Crownlanders before they set foot on Tyrell soil. Margaery stood atop the battlements, watching them depart, hand resting on Olenna's arm. At the eastern gate, Jaime oversaw the second column, 4,000 strong, heading toward the Stormlands. Leading the van were Tyrell knights, each bearing polished helms adorned with rose crests. Bronn followed close by, wearing a confident grin, already counting the gold he'd earned from the spoils or the promotions. Dozens of supply wagons rumbled behind them. Jaime himself rode a tall warhorse, clad in partial plate, his golden hand holding the reins with practiced skill, his sword at his hip. Just before they left, Mace Tyrell trotted up to Jaime's flank, his mount prancing under the weight of its lord. "Sir Jaime," he called, voice booming with forced joviality. "I trust you'll give those Stormland traitors a thrashing they'll never forget. The Tyrell name stands behind you." Jaime nodded. "We'll do what we must. Guard Highgarden well, Lord Tyrell. We can't lose our heart while we're out chasing the enemy." Mace beamed, puffing out his chest. "Fear not. None shall breach these walls under my watch or under Lady Olenna's. She's quite thorough." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "I never thought I'd see the day we marched to fight Lannisters under Lannister command. Strange times, eh?" Jaime's expression was unreadable. "Strange times indeed, my lord. But if it secures the Reach, we'll call it a victory." Mace nodded vigorously, then wheeled his horse around to address some other captains. With that, Jaime signaled the column forward. The drawbridge lowered, hooves clattering across the heavy timbers. He spared a final glance back at the castle walls. He couldn't make out Margaery's form from here, but he felt her presence within those stones, watching him ride away. He lifted his golden hand in a silent farewell. The day was bright, the sun climbing steadily in a cloudless sky as they set off. Jaime led the column eastward, intending to skirt the Rose Road for a while before angling southeast, heading toward the Stormland frontier. Along the way, they would gather smaller contingents from local lords who had already been summoned. He knew time was short. Word would spread that the Tyrell-Lannister alliance was on the move. Cersei's watchers would scramble to guess where the blow would fall. Hours turned into days of hard marching. The farmland gave way to rolling hills, then patches of sparse woodland. Scouts ranged ahead, scanning for enemy outriders. Each night, they made camp in strategic positions with pickets posted in all directions. Jaime hardly slept, haunted by thoughts of what might be happening with Tarly's northern force, or what might already be transpiring in the Stormlands. His men, though anxious, trusted him more each passing day. They saw in him a commander who rode among them, not above them. He spoke plainly, organized the supply lines efficiently, and insisted on fair discipline. As a result, morale held steady, an essential element when facing uncertain battle. Bronn proved valuable, drilling squads in close-quarters tactics in the evenings. The Tyrell Knights, more used to open-field charges, adapted to new approaches with minimal grumbling. Finally, on the 7th day, their scouts returned with an urgent report near the Windwater crossing. "Stormland banners ahead," the lead scout said, voice tight with excitement. Maybe 2,000 men, camped along the far side of the river. They're waiting, likely for more to join them. Didn't see any crown banners, though a few Sellsword outfits might be among them. Jaime's heart quickened. 2,000 was manageable. If those men were awaiting reinforcements, now was the time to strike. "Are they well fortified?" "Moderate," the scout replied. "They've set some palisades near the riverbank, but it's not a full fortification. The water's shallow in places, easy to cross if we do it quickly." Jaime turned to his assembled captains. "We'll move under cover of darkness, approach from the west. If we can catch them unawares before dawn, we can disrupt their camp. Once they're scattered, we'll push them toward the river. Even if some escape, we can break their morale." Bronn grinned. "A night attack, my favorite. They won't see it coming." The captains nodded, spines straightening with anticipation. This was the moment they'd prepared for. Jaime gave orders to strike camp immediately and advance another few miles while the light held. After dusk, they'd close in. The hours leading up to the assault were tense. Men oiled their armor, sharpened their blades, muffled their horses' tack. Under the moonlight, the column moved in near silence, every clank of metal sounding alarmingly loud to Jaime's ears. The distant glow of campfires marked where the Stormland force lay, unwitting of the attack about to fall upon them. In hushed tones, Jaime laid out the final plan with his lieutenants. They would split into 3 prongs, each approaching from a different angle. Torches would remain unlit until the charge began. The mounted knights would cross the shallows first, aiming to sow confusion. Infantry would follow, pinning the enemy against the river's edge or driving them into the low hills. With luck, they'd have won the battle before sunrise. An hour before dawn, the assault began. Horns sounded muffled signals. The Tyrell Knights and Lannister-led men advanced, hearts pounding. Jaime rode at the vanguard, the chill night air biting his cheeks. He felt alive with adrenaline, the old thrill of battle coursing through him, tempered by the knowledge that this time, he fought for a cause he believed in. Their arrival on the outskirts of the Stormland camp was heralded by startled shouts. Sentinels rushed to sound the alarm, but the Tyrell cavalry cut them down before they could spread chaos. Then the horns of Jaime's force blared in earnest, long, resonant calls that echoed off the dark riverbank. Men poured across the shallows, water splashing around the horses' hooves. Tent flaps flew open in the enemy camp, half-dressed soldiers stumbling out, weapons barely in hand. Some tried to form ranks, but the suddenness of the attack and the darkness made it nearly impossible. Jaime slashed at a panicked foe, deflecting a wild spear thrust with his golden hand. Nearby, Bronn led a squad of footmen, lunging through the labyrinth of tents to cut down anything bearing a Stormland sigil. The clamor of battle rose, a cacophony of steel on steel, screams, and the war cries of charging knights. Figures darted between tents lit by the glow of dying campfires. Jaime pressed forward, urging his horse deeper into the fray, calling out orders for the second wave of infantry to close ranks and encircle. If the Stormlanders organized a countercharge, it needed to be contained quickly. In the shifting dance of torches, Jaime caught glimpses of sigils. House Fell, House Buckler, House Grandison. These were storied Stormland houses, once loyal to the Baratheons. Now they served a queen who offered them gold or stoked old rivalries with the Tyrells. They fought fiercely, but the ambush had shattered their readiness. Many reeled under the relentless assault, forced back toward the river. A band of Stormland knights rallied near a stand of trees, forming a shield wall to buy time for their comrades to regroup. Jaime recognized them as a determined knot of men who refused to break. Spurring his horse, he led a wedge of Tyrell cavalry straight at them. The clash was brutal. Spears scraped across shields, swords bit into armor. Jaime parried a blow that would have sliced open his horse's flank, then drove his own blade into the knight's shoulder. The knight fell with a muffled cry. The shield wall cracked, and the Tyrell cavalry poured through, scattering the defenders. In the wake of that breakthrough, the enemy lines collapsed. Some tried to flee across the river, only to be met by archers stationed on the far bank. Others threw down their weapons, surrendering on the spot. A few small pockets fought on, but by the time the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, the Stormland host was in full disarray. Jaime drew up his horse near the center of what had been the enemy camp. Men lay dead or wounded among trampled tents. Surrendered knights knelt in small groups, guarded by Tyrell men-at-arms. The shallow river ran red in places with swirling blood. It was a scene he knew all too well. The cost of war, savage and real. He forced himself not to dwell on it, focusing instead on completing the objective. Bronn approached, sweat glistening on his brow, sword still clutched in his hand. "Well, that was bracing," he said, voice thick with the rush of combat. "I'd say we've routed them good and proper." Jaime glanced around. "Losses?" Bronn shrugged. "We took some casualties, maybe a few dozen dead, more wounded, but we did far worse to them." He jerked his head toward the mass of battered prisoners. "They won't be rejoining Cersei's war anytime soon." Jaime nodded grimly. "Good. Gather the men, get the wounded seen to. Ensure no stragglers are waiting to ambush. Then we regroup." He wiped sweat and blood from his forehead with a rag, the acrid stench of battle filling his nostrils. By full dawn, the Tyrell forces had seized control of the area. The final pockets of resistance had either fled into the hills or surrendered. Jaime walked his horse along the riverbank, surveying the wreckage. The dead wore Stormland sigils, but they were men of Westeros all the same, forced into a conflict that neither side truly wanted. Yet this was what Cersei's ambition had wrought. As he considered the next steps, whether to push further east or return to Highgarden, one of his captains rode up hurriedly. "Sir Jaime, you'll want to see this," the man said, beckoning him. Jaime followed, weaving between downed tents, eventually coming to a clearing near a toppled pavilion. There, 2 Tyrell knights stood guard over a sullen figure with a bandaged arm. The man's tunic bore the buckled antlers of House Buckler, and his face was pale and angry. "He claims to have urgent news," the captain explained, dismounting. "Says he'll speak only to you." Jaime approached, looking down at the wounded man. "What is it?" The prisoner winced, pressing a hand to his arm. "I'd rather be your prisoner than serve that mad queen. But you should know there's another force not far from here. A Sellsword company from Essos, the Golden Company or something like that. They're marching from the southeast. They might arrive within a few days." A chill snaked down Jaime's spine. The Golden Company, famed for discipline and unwavering contracts, rumored to be thousands strong at times. He bit back a curse. How far? What route? The man struggled to sit upright. They were expected to cross over from the Rainwood area. "If you stay here, they'll eventually catch you. And they won't be caught sleeping like we were." Jaime's mind raced. If the Golden Company truly marched under Cersei's coin, then this victory could turn to disaster if they arrived fresh and well-prepared. He had the advantage of numbers now, but weariness would set in soon. Another pitched battle might be too much. "All right," he said at length, turning to his captain. Spread the word. We'll fortify the position for a day, rest the men. Then we need to decide if we press on or withdraw. Post extra scouts in the southeast. If the Golden Company is near, I want to know. The captain nodded, setting off to relay orders. Jaime stared down at the prisoner a moment longer. Thank you for the warning. We'll see that you're given water and your wounds cared for. The man barked a bitter laugh. Generous for a Lannister. Perhaps you're different than the Queen claims. Jaime's expression remained stony as he turned away. Different indeed. He could only hope it would be enough to outmaneuver Cersei's next move. 2 days later, with the Stormland force decisively broken, Jaime's men had reorganized and tended to their wounded. Scouts returned with troubling news. A large Sellsword column was indeed moving northward through the hills. Estimates ranged from 3,000 to 4,000, possibly more. The men carried professional gear and marched under disciplined ranks, a sign that these were no ordinary rabble. Jaime convened a war council in what remained of the captured campsite. Bronn, the knights of House Tyrell, and a few lesser lords from the region gathered around a makeshift map drawn in the dirt. Torches flickered in the dusk, illuminating anxious faces. If we clash with the Golden Company now, we risk losing all we've gained, said one Tyrell knight. They're more disciplined than the Stormlanders. Our men are exhausted from the night attack and the subsequent cleanup. Bronn folded his arms. We can still take them if we time it right. They might be disciplined, but they're not invincible. And we've got more men, about 4,000 to their 3, maybe a bit more on their side, but close enough. A good ambush could break them. Jaime stared at the crude map. An ambush in these hills might be possible, but if it fails, we'd be stuck in open battle with a well-rested force. Our men are far from fresh. He paused, thinking. Alternatively, we could withdraw back toward Highgarden, force them to chase us onto ground of our choosing. We'd have more time to rest, possibly get reinforcements. But we'd risk letting them link up with any remnants of Stormland or Crown forces still out there. It was a grim calculus. Jaime felt the weight of leadership press on him. One mistake could doom the entire operation. He wished he had more concrete intelligence, exact numbers, the exact location of the Sellswords, or an update from Tarly and Kevan. Had they already engaged the Crownlanders near Hayford? Had they succeeded or failed? Without that knowledge, deciding whether to press or withdraw felt like a coin toss. Finally, Jaime set his jaw. We'll err on the side of caution. We've accomplished our immediate objective, which was to disrupt the Stormland column. Let's not overreach. We return west, draw the Golden Company toward the Rose Road, where we have more room to maneuver. If they chase us, we can hit them in open battle with a cavalry charge. If they hesitate, we can rejoin the Tyrell main host and face them with overwhelming numbers. Bronn looked mildly disappointed, but he shrugged. You're the Lord, boss. Just make sure we're not turning tail for no reason. This isn't running away, Jaime said firmly. It's refusing to fight on unfavorable ground. We can't help Tarly or Kevan if we get trapped here. The decision made, the knights quickly set about preparing to move at first light. They would leave behind any tents they didn't need, load the wagons with what spoils they could carry, and destroy the rest so it wouldn't fall into enemy hands. Prisoners would be escorted, though some of the wounded might be paroled if they posed no threat. The sense of tension grew, a feeling that they were dancing on the edge of a blade. Any misstep could bring the Golden Company crashing down on them. That night, Jaime stood watch at the perimeter, restless. The faint light of a waning moon revealed the silhouette of the hills to the southeast. Shadows moved in the distance, likely animals or shifting breezes across the brush, but every flicker set Jaime on edge. He wondered if the Golden Company's scouts crept nearby, watching for weaknesses. Eventually, Bronn sidled up, yawning. You should sleep, you know. We've got a lot of ground to cover tomorrow. Jaime didn't move his gaze from the horizon. I will. Just needed a moment. Bronn let out a low chuckle. Thinking about your queen sister? Or your wife, back in Highgarden? Jaime shot him a sidelong glare. She's not my queen, and my wife is the Lady of Highgarden. Yeah, touchy. Bronn smirked, unoffended. Still, you're fretting over something. Let me guess. The approach of a massive Sellsword army while you're out here with a battered force. Jaime flexed the golden hand. That sums it up nicely. Bronn grew quiet. Look, we gave him a good thrashing, yeah? You've proven yourself. Another day, another fight. Just how it goes in this blasted country. At least the Tyrell coffers are deep. If we live, we'll have coin and maybe a bit of peace, once Cersei's done. She won't stop, Jaime murmured. Even if we break her armies, she'll scheme some other approach. But maybe this war can end if we force her to the table. Bronn shrugged. Be nice if that happened, but I won't hold my breath. Royals rarely back down easy. They stood in silence, the hush of the night sing in. Jaime recalled how, in his youth, he had soared through battles with arrogance, certain the Lannisters were untouchable. Now, he felt the vulnerability in every nerve, felt the risk that came with standing openly against the crown. But he also felt a strange clarity. He would see this through no matter the outcome. At last, he sighed. Get some rest, Bronn. I'll take another hour, then find my bedroll. Bronn clapped him on the shoulder. Don't stay up too long, old lion. We need you in one piece. He ambled off, leaving Jaime alone with his thoughts. The night sky stretched above, vast and uncaring. Jaime studied it for a moment, imagining Margaery gazing up at the same stars from within Highgarden's walls. He closed his eyes briefly, wishing for a swift resolution. Then he straightened, reminding himself that wishes alone changed nothing. The only path forward was battle and strategy, blood and steel. In a realm where mercy was often a weakness, he hoped that his choice to stand beside Margaery Tyrell would yield something better than endless carnage. He exhaled, let the tension settle, and turned his watchful gaze back to the horizon, determined to guard his men against whatever the next dawn might bring.